Brent, I've been looking forward to this ever since our last conversation. For those of you who haven't heard part one, I would say please definitely do go check it out. Brent describes not only how he became an LSAT teacher, but two, he gives us a little lesson on logic. And when I say little lesson, I feel like, Brent, your lessons that you taught me about logic are really the foundation of my critical thinking ability. And so I just want everybody to take, classes in logic. But if you're not going to take classes in logic, if you're not going to be formally trained, I feel like your ability to simply yet clearly teach logic and critical thinking is just unmatched. So with that said, Brent, great to have you back today. And I'm really looking forward to part two.
Thanks. Yeah, it was super fun for me, and I do love teaching logic. I think it's really. I always felt like I wish that universities would just require a course in logic generally. I think it would just overall help so many different things. But yeah, the ability to look at the world around us and say, well, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? And is this a valid argument or is it not? I think that's one of the big things that's I think is lacking in a lot of situations.
There's a one of my favorite songs from Veggie Tales is something like, if it doesn't have a tail, it's a monkey. If it doesn't have a tail, it's a monkey, it's an ape, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like clear rule, you know, tail, monkey, no, ape. And it's just, they start applying that rule to everything. And at one point, the guy says, Larry, I think there's something wrong with your logic. And I just, like you, I wish this was required in even, high school. And I'm sure you wouldn't complain about that either.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
would go I would go lower than that. Yeah.
so before we jump into part two, the I really want to talk about the book that you're writing. I thought we could just go through just a couple more logical fallacies that we didn't touch on last time, because I think these are
Yeah.
great ones to talk about.
Oh yeah.
And one of the first ones that I actually think about a lot, because one, according to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the best treatments there is for depression, mind reading is one of these kind of risk factors that comes up. People who tend to mind read a lot
Yeah.
are prone to suffer from depression, and so cognitive behavioral therapy teaches people to not mind read. And so anyway, one of these logical fallacies is mind reading. So I'd love to hear kind of how you teach why mind reading is a logical fallacy.
Yeah. So this actually is one of the skills and specifically one of the kind of ideas that's tested really heavily on the LSAT. You see it on literally every single LSAT test has at least a few questions about this. And I teach it more from the standpoint of how it deals with, law and logic. But the basic idea is that we cannot assume mental states just based on actions or physical states. And so, very frequently, what we'll see in an LSAT type scenario is it will talk about maybe, it might say, a particular person was driving and they veered off the road and uh, hit a mailbox and destroyed it, and then drove back on the road and continued. Um, so we have a scenario like that. So all they've done is they've given us a set of actions or physical states, something that happens. And then what they'll try and trick people into doing on the LSAT, the wrong answers, will include things like the driver intended to hit the mailbox, or something like that. And that doesn't work from a logical standpoint. We can't just assume intent based on actions because sometimes people don't mean to do the things that they do. Um, and sort of this idea of kind of assuming mental states, that's that mind reading fallacy. It's the idea that we can know what's going on in other people's heads, and that's a little dangerous. And I found it in a lot of areas, but on the LSAT, it's one of the most commonly tested fallacies. It's also a huge thing, and I talk with students about why this is so important in the law. Um, you obviously know this having gone to law school, but with most types of, well, basically with all intentional torts and most types of crime, um, there are two factors that have to be proven in order to establish that you've committed a particular crime. And that's they use the Latin terms actus reus and mens rea. And so you have those two separate things. And the actus reus means the physical act, and the mens rea is the mental state behind that. Um, and I kind of use an example, that I tell people in class. I'm like, okay, let's just take a simple scenario. You wake up tomorrow morning and you walk into your living room and there's a stranger you've never seen asleep on your couch. You know, Obviously you're a little taken aback, and your immediate thought is probably, well, they're obviously trespassing. And the question is, are they or are they not trespassing? And the fact is, we don't know at that point. All we know is they're asleep on your couch. Now, trespassing does require a particular mental intent, and that is that they had to intend to be at that place. Now, they didn't have to intend to trespass. So they didn't have to know that it was your house or that they're not allowed in that house. They just had to intend to go to that place or to be in that place. And so, I give the example. I'm like, so yeah, if they walked into your house and were like, hey, it looks pretty comfortable here, I think I'm going to lay down and sleep. Sure, they're trespassing. But maybe they were out with friends, had a little bit too much to drink, they passed out, and their friends thought it'd be a funny joke to go put them on Nate's couch. So they put them on Nate's couch, you come out. They're not trespassing at that point because they never formed that intent. They never did anything that would intend that. Um, and so I kind of talk through, those sorts of things. And, that's kind of a silly example, not that big, but it becomes really important, particularly when we're talking about homicide type things. The different layers of homicide are almost not entirely, but are largely dictated by the intent and the mental states that were behind it. And so, we kind of talk through that. So, with that idea, I think is really, really critical for just a lot of different things in life, but it's particularly important on the LSAT that we can't assume what's going through someone's head based on what they're doing. And I think that in life generally, one of the best things we can do is ask people, tell me what you're thinking or feeling right now. Help me understand this a little better. That one question is really, really critical. And I found that oftentimes some of my like sort of dumbest, like worst moments were when I did assume that I knew what was going on in people's heads, and wrongly. I found um, this. I don't know if I talked about this, but we really do have a tendency to catastrophize things, and we assume that we'll know what people will or do think or feel in response to certain things. And almost always we're wrong. We're not very accurate on those things. And there's been a lot of studies that have shown that. There was a really cool one that I don't know if I shared this, but it was they talked about a study where basically they went through and had people um, agree to confess to something that they had done, and it involved several thousand people, and it ranged from everything from, you know, I pick my nose and eat it to marital infidelity. I mean, so it ran kind of the spectrum of different things, and beforehand they had them write up how they think the person they were confessing to would feel and how they would react to it. And then afterwards, they interviewed the people who to whom they had confessed. So then they actually had to go through with it, which I think is really kind of a cool. I mean, kudos to all the people who agreed,
Yeah.
in the thing. I think it speaks to our desire to be vulnerable, like to actually open up. Like we don't love keeping secrets. Like I think it eats at us in ways that are destructive. Um, but so kudos to them for doing it. But in virtually every case, it was like 95 plus percent, people massively overestimated the negative impact of their confession.
Mm.
Um, and what they found was that even in a lot of cases, the people that they interviewed afterwards actually felt more positively about the person who had confessed than negatively about the person.
Wow.
And so it didn't hurt. Um, and I think that speaks to kind of we're just not very good mind readers. like you said, we think we know, but a lot of times we are coloring that with like a worst case scenario lens. I mean, I don't know what the opposite of rose-colored glasses is, but when we start looking into other people's minds, I think we put on, you know, very dark colored shades that really just aren't really consistent with reality in a lot of cases. And I love that. That's one of the fallacies on the LSAT that I think it highlights that look, there's physical states, and we need to separate that from mental states. And it's funny because I think it's a lot easier for everybody to see the alternative. And because, if I make the statement, I'm like, well, Dave intends to play in the NBA, therefore he will. That's that
Offensive
doesn't
fallacy.
really work. Like we see the difference between intent and action when we're going from intent to action. But sometimes we assume that it goes the other way a lot more easily. So,
Yeah, it reminds me of some work I've heard about and read about on creativity and how our brains, when we're trying to brainstorm and come up with ideas, they try to conserve energy. And so, as soon as you come up with one a good idea, then your brain wants to shut down. And it's like when we see somebody do an action, our kind of immediate reaction is to try to mind read. Well, why did they do this? We come up with a seemingly plausible answer, and then it's almost like we flip the arrow. It's like, well, I know that mental state leads to action, or actually that's not always true, but kind of
yeah,
generally like mental state,
right.
mental
Yeah,
state generally leads to action. And then we flip the arrow and say, okay, well, then I know what I see the action. So therefore I know what mental state they were in. There's just a number of interesting fallacies here. And like you said, it's so prevalent, not only just in, maybe in like journalism or in politics, but it's relevant to all of us in our own personal lives. And that's why I think this one is so important.
yeah. No, and that is one that definitely is there. And it's funny, the thing we were talking about right before we started with my experience with a good friend and partner, um, really was like that. And I was just dead wrong on what I was assuming, in sort of what he was thinking and feeling. And yeah, it made it so that I said and did things that were just really just jerk moves, like really just kind of I was a dick. And um, but again, it was I made assumptions and thought that I knew what was happening, and I didn't.
Yeah, mind reading. Okay, so dangerous. Great explanation. Another one that has always stuck with me is, well, the past predicts the future, right? Isn't it
Yeah.
right?
So, and this is such an interesting one. I mean, it goes back to so there's I think it's related to a lot of things. So the philosopher David Hume talks about that we never actually see causation. Instead, what we see is a consistent temporal juxtaposition of two events in sequence, and basically saying, well, we don't actually see, you know, X causing Y. What we see is X happens and then Y happens immediately afterwards. And the more that they happen, the more that we read like causation, that these two things are perfectly linked. Um, but Hume basically says, look, the fact that you've seen something happen 100 times in that same order doesn't necessarily tell you whether or not there is causation. And he says, now, obviously, if you see it happen 1,000 times and it always happens the same way, sure. You notice that the sky gets light every morning about a certain time, and shortly afterwards, this big glowing ball comes up above the mountain or the horizon. Well, we assume that probably the big glowing ball might be causing the light, but you can make other things, from that. And so, basically, the idea that we don't necessarily see that. But what he says, we all have to live our lives as though it does. And basically, I kind of respected Hume for saying, look, yeah, technically, I know I'm saying this, but I and everyone else lives as though when we see two things happen in sequence, that we assume that there's causation. Okay. If every time, you've seen someone, get hit by a car, then you probably and who gets injured, you could probably say, I do think that getting hit by the car is causing the injuries. And so you don't cross the street when there's cars coming. So, he talks a little bit about that. But the problem is we sometimes take that sort of reasoning and then shrink it down to apply to smaller and smaller situations. So if something happens where X occurs and then Y occurs, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's always going to be the case. And just because something happened a certain way in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen that same way in the future. And so you kind of have those, those two fallacies that are kind of linked in a lot of ways. But what's happened in the past doesn't necessarily tell us what's happening now, and what's happening now doesn't necessarily tell us what happens in the future. And so that past, present, and future, kind of separating those as sort of the temporal fallacy, if you will, those become, sort of things that are easy to read in because in a lot of situations in life, we do need to use that. If we've seen a certain behavior in the past, yeah, we might automatically just assume that same thing is going to happen. And while it is reasonable to say that might be likely, I think we put too much stock in limited examples from the past to therefore generating a lot of probability towards things that are going to be happening in the future. And I think we all would like to think, especially in interpersonal relationships, just because someone has done something in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do that same thing in the future. I think we all would like to think that we can change, that we can be better. I certainly would, like that's, and so I think that's another one that's really common on the LSAT. They'll say, you know, the last three times that there's one that talks about there's the last three times that somebody has gone to this restaurant, they've gotten sick. Therefore, if they eat at that restaurant again, they'll get sick. And while there may be some evidence for that, that doesn't really follow logically. We don't know for sure. There could have been other factors that it might not be the restaurant that's causing it. Just because eating at the restaurant was followed by being sick doesn't necessarily tell us that was the case. It definitely means, well, we should probably look at it. But on that particular question, what it highlights is that it ends up that it wasn't that the restaurant itself caused him to be sick, but rather the amount and types of food that he ate caused him to be sick. So you get things like that. In that, yeah, we don't necessarily know from the past what for sure is going to happen in the future.
Maybe you shared this with me in class, but there's that quote that's attributed to Einstein about how insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But
Yeah,
that doesn't really follow because sometimes if you do the same thing over and over again, the situations or circumstances change, and then that can lead to a different outcome.
yeah,
So just because the past has played out in a particular way, doesn't mean it's always going to play out the same way. Even if you're doing the same thing, you
yeah,
very likely get different results.
yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting um, because I think on some level they're actually like we do have to assume that there are elements where that is going to be false. So, I when I was in my teens, I was trying to dunk a basketball, and um, I kept trying to do that over and over and over and over and over and failed over and over and over and over and over. Um, but I kept trying to do it. And I kept doing, exercises to, like work on, sort of jumping better and doing different things. And literally kept, hitting the bottom of the rim, hitting the bottom of the rim, hitting the middle of the rim, just bricking it off the rim over and over, and probably literally thousands of times. Um, and, but I kept doing it. And eventually, I was able to do it. And I don't know if it was I was having a good jump day the first time, just it happened one day. Maybe I was holding the ball a little bit different, but I kept doing the same thing over and over. And I think that like there is that persistence does pay off in certain situations, that yeah, I mean, if there are things where it isn't necessarily, we can't necessarily change it, but I think persistence changes us. So even if we're doing the same things, we build capacity to do things that we couldn't do before. And so, I think I think, when we think about growth and stuff, I think that's one of the things. Yeah, there's actually a lot of things where doing the same thing over and over, even though it's not getting the results you want, is exactly what you need to do.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, any sort of growth, that's the core of it, is I'm going to do the same thing and I'm going to hope for different outcomes over time, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's, practicing a language, whether it's, doing whatever. We do have to think, yeah, that there can be differences in time.
Okay, so that's just a little taste of topics that we touched on last time in terms of logical fallacies. There's more. Testimony, why we can't rely on testimony, or possible probable versus actual certain, one option versus the only option. But as much as I love those things, I do want to save time to talk about the book. And that's where we're going to mostly focus this episode, is
Yeah.
on the book that you wrote and recently shared with me. And so first of all, why did you decide to write a book?
So it really was, I kind of wanted to write a book for for my kids, to that I really felt like. So it's funny, my wife kind of teases me a little bit about this, but I have a lot of what I call Brent Dunn theories, which just, it's the way that I think the world is. And generally they start off that I don't have a lot of empirical evidence for it. It's not something where, I could, they're not peer-reviewed studies. But they're based on my experience and what I think, what I've seen in my life. Um, and some of them are kind of simple, but they're just little things that I've found that I kind of wanted to pass on. And I think, just like you with this podcast, kind of wanting to pass on wisdom and get more wisdom in that generation. And so I started writing a book for for my kids. And the one of the triggering factors was the um, experience that I share kind of in that opening chapter about at my daughter's wedding, and just kind of thinking, wow, that came really fast. Like, it's, when you have little kids, you're just kind of scrambling to get by most days. Like, there are a lot of days where it feels like that. And so when my oldest daughter got married, it really was like this, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I I I don't have time with her like I used to. And so it really kind of kicked me into this mode of, oh, okay, I want to write these things down so that I can pass it on to them in a way that, when I'm gone or when I'm away from them even, that they could, they can still have that. So that was kind of what triggered it. And, I talk a little bit about it in, in that opening chapter, that scene of, um, you know, juxtaposing, um, and I'll get emotional a lot when I talk about my kids. So I may have to pause, um, but yeah, just, I was thinking about, um, the taking her to her first dance class and then dancing with her at her wedding. And, it just, I was like, wow, this happened so fast. And I want to make sure that I get these ideas down for them, so that it's not, I don't lose them. So, that was kind of the impetus behind it. So I spent a couple of years, just writing down, and, when I'd have time, I'd write a chapter here, write a chapter there, and then kind of tried to, I ended up, so one of my daughters was, she was kind of having a rough time with a little bit of depression and things. And so I was like, oh, I just kind of threw it together into kind of a pseudo draft and sent that to her. Um, and that was kind of how it stayed for then quite a while, really, until we started talking a little while ago, and I was like, oh, yeah, I should probably kind of start looking at that again. And so I've just kind of been tinkering with it again, adding in, so I'd written some more chapters here and there. But so just, yeah, started with that. Um, and then, I realized that a lot of it are the things that I also try to share a little bit here and there in class. Um, but, I thought, well, if I want this for my kids, um, if this is what I want my kids to know, I don't want it to just be for my kids, because I really, they're principles that I hope will make the world a kinder, better place. And if my kids are going to be in that world, then I also want them to be in a kinder, better place. And I want that for other people too. I kind of talk about my basic life theory, on, I've got a really simple, moral philosophy, and it just is, it's not complex, but it is, it's kind of what I think. And that's that good is things that increases the joy or happiness of the universe, and bad is that decreases the overall. And so anything that's going to increase would be good. And so I feel like this is something that could help with that. So I may as well kind of spend more time on it.
So this is so fun for me because I started this podcast with the express purpose of passing on lessons to my kid that I most wanted to pass on. And many of them were too young at the time to comprehend the lessons. One of my, let's see, one child had just been born, and then I reach out, and so I start this podcast. I share all these lessons. My first, 25 episodes or so were all just monologues. And then I think, well, what can I collect from other people that they most want to pass on? Things they've really thought about. And so when I reached out to you, I wanted to capture for my kids and for my students now, it's kind of evolved as well for students I teach. I wanted to capture how much you've impacted my life in terms of my ability to think critically and to use logic. And so it was like this was an important part of my life that I was trying to pass on to my kids. And so that is essentially part one of the interview that we did last time. But as we started communicating about this interview, you mentioned that you'd written this book. And so then I read the book, and then I was so excited because now not only do I get to pass on the way you've impacted my life in terms of critical thinking, but now all of this thinking that you've been doing about all the lessons you want to pass on to your kids, now I hope my kids will listen to this interview and learn from you. Like you said, one of your, philosophies is that good increases joy in the world. And that was one of the first things I said when I read your book was, I think this does increase joy. Your book does. And so I want you to, I would hope you'd share it more broadly. And I'm grateful for the chance we had to talk about it today. What other philosophies? You said you've got some pretty simple philosophies. So maybe we could just from here, what lessons did you most want to share with your kids?
Yeah. So the first thing, so kind of to lay a little bit of foundation, and I I talk about this so much lately, especially, but I really think that um, that we start with purpose, and I do believe that our purpose is in life is joy, um, and I believe that for a number of different reasons, but I think that it's important to understand what I mean by joy, because I think joy, it's such a broadly thrown around term, and I think joy actually has a very specific definition, and that is, I believe that joy is the feeling that we experience. It is what we experience when we recognize growth or improvement in either ourselves or in those we love. And that is really the core of my moral philosophy, is if joy is what we're after, and I do believe that that's joy is A, what we want, and B, I think it's our larger purpose. That is seeing like growth or improvement in ourselves or people that we love. And so I think that's kind of at the core of everything that I do and everything that I think. So that's just kind of the foundational thing. So as we, all of the other things we talk about kind of center around that basic idea.
And can I just
Uh,
say something too? You could think of like, well, like happiness or fulfillment, but
yeah,
you've been thoughtful about joy and then in how you define joy.
yeah. And it's like I said, I think that I like that definition, and there are a couple of reasons why I think it resonates with me. One, there really is something, joy feels different to me than just happiness, um, that I think that that's a different, I can be happy but not feel joy. I think those are different, and they're really close. But that I think true joy does come with growth. Now, there are two things about joy, that definition, that really kind of make me the most like that I feel are important. Number one, it makes it so that joy really is available to everyone at all points. Like there is no, like that's not something anybody else can control, because you have two potential ways to achieve joy or achieve greater joy or create greater joy. And the simplest one is just do things that lead to your own growth. Like that's one of them. Um, and if you do things consistently that help you to recognize growth in yourself, yeah, you're going to feel joy. Um, Whether that's meeting your weight loss goals, or, meeting your, weight gain goals in terms of lifting weights, whether it's getting better at performing on the piano, whether it's simply just making the space that you live in or work in more tidy and more beautiful. Um, so like it doesn't really matter when we see that, we feel joy, and I think that that's important. So we are in control of that. The second thing is that there's two paths to joy. One is kind of working to improve, or see improvement in ourselves. And I think more importantly, that's actually the smaller of the two pools, because we're only one person. And the other thing is that when we see growth or improvement in those that we love, then we also feel joy. And the pool of people that we love is limited basically by our choice. Like we can increase our ability to feel joy simply by expanding the pool of people that we love, um, and or helping those people to experience growth. It's part of why I think that, like, that is part of why my job, I feel like I have maybe one of the best jobs in the world, in that I get to see these students that I really do come to love over the length of the course, make improvements on a test that ends up mattering. You know, I mean, where you go to law school does matter in terms of a lot of things in their life, but also that their ability to think critically, just like you said, like they think differently. They are better thinkers. And so I get to see that growth in a very short period of time. And so my job for me really does create an enormous amount of joy. Um, but that's also, I think, part of what the joy of being a parent is, like that when we see improvement in our children, when we help them grow. Um, and the beauty of being a parent is through childhood, you get to see a lot of growth very quickly. Um, and so I think that's one of them. But so that idea of joy as growth, and recognizing it, because we do have to recognize it. If we don't see the growth,
Mhm.
we don't feel the joy. And so some of it is learning to recognize that growth. Um, but but that with my kids, um so it kind of it started out like with this experience with my daughter. Um so um basically I did a lot of dance in high school. I loved to dance. It really ended up being formative, helped me through some really difficult years of my life. And one of my daughters, my oldest daughter, she's just a natural dancer. I mean, she just feels music inside her. She would, when she was a toddler, if we turned on music, she started moving to it. Like it, and would move differently with different types of music. Like you could just see she just had it in her.
Mhm.
Always had that, which was really fun for me. So I talked about this in our last one, but I had the benefit of, I was actually the parent, full-time caregiver parent at home for my two oldest kids, for all of their kind of formative years. And so I got to be at home with her. I got to see that developing. Um, and so it kind of started when I took her to her first dance class. Um, she was a little nervous, and I could tell. And so just before she went in, I told her, and I didn't think about it before, but I just said, I love you, have fun, do your best. And those are the three things that I said. And then and she just kind of perked up and then ran in and she had a great time. She loved dance, did dance all throughout her life. She still does performing. It's more she does like aerial silks
Oh
now
yeah.
and stuff like kind of more the Cirque du Soleil kind of thing.
Hmm.
But but yeah, so that's what she does now. But she went through and did the Ballet West pre-professional program and everything. So she just dances. It's what she does, and she did love it. But I kind of realized that those are actually the things that I really wanted them to know. Um, that I always wanted them to know that I loved them, and that more than anything else. Um, and the second thing was have fun. Like I think that having fun is really a critical thing. And it's funny, if I'd had time to think about it, I would have, built in some sort of deeper thing about joy, but she was four, so have fun made sense. And I do think that that's a good thing. I think um that we do have fun with things, and if we can see that joy, if we can treat hard things as just a type of growth, then we do have fun with them. Um, and then the third thing, is do your best. And I think that's really one of the big things that I've really tried to push with my kids is that I I don't want them to feel like I'm outcome driven. I'm more, what I want is their input. I want them to do their best. And the outcomes can be whatever they will. Like that's fine. But what I care about and what they can control is that they try their best. And each of those actually, concepts is really pretty big. I mean, behind the idea of love, there's a lot of
Yeah.
ideas there. Having fun, there's a lot of actual elements to that beyond just, oh, well, just enjoy life. And then doing your best, um, that it's not about comparison. It doesn't matter what other people are doing, and that our best will change, over time. And that's an important thing. So that's, I told her that, and then that's just kind of become my mantra. So anytime I drop off my kids for things, throughout their lives, they know that's what I'm going to tell them is I love you, have fun, do your best. And I drop them off at school, when I drop them off for things, when they head out the door for a date, whatever it is, I kind of tell them that because that's really what I hope for them. I hope they do their best. I hope they know that they're loved, and I hope that they have fun and experience joy. So that was kind of the basis of the book and the basic theory. And I mean, it sounds simple, but I've been surprised as I delved into it how there's a lot to those simple ideas. I'm a big fan of Eastern philosophy. Like I think the Tao, the Art of War, those kinds of things. I've always preferred that a little bit to Western philosophy. I joke and apologies to anyone who's big fans of maybe continental philosophers, but um, I think Western philosophy has become kind of it's the art of taking a really simple idea and expanding it to 500 pages of text, um, and on the flip side of that, Eastern philosophy is taking a life-changing idea and putting it into 5 words. And so I kind of do lean a little more towards, I really felt like, that I'm a fan of a lot of Eastern philosophy. I think it's good to have little things that convey truths, but you have to think about deeply over
Yeah.
time.
Okay, well, let's dive into each of these topics then. So
Yeah.
let's dig into joy, love, fun, and doing your best. So in terms of joy, uh, for example, you started playing hockey when you were
Yeah.
older. How did that bring you joy?
So this was actually like kind of a really kind of like aha moment for me. So I lived in Finland. I served a mission for my church in the country of Finland. Um, and Finland is really big into hockey. Part of it is that it's really cold there. So you've got a third of the country is inside the Arctic Circle. Um, so it's cold. But so I ended up doing translation for the Finnish Olympic Committee for food. Like they would have these dinners. They were having a dinner at this restaurant, and the restaurant contacted me through a friend and said, "Hey, would you be willing to come translate for the Finnish Olympic Committee for food?" And I had been friends with a person in Finland who was a chef, and so I was able to kind of reach out, find out some of the because I didn't know all the cooking terms from my time in Finland. So I ended up translating for some of the food things, and so through that I ended up getting to go to the Olympic hockey match between Finland and Russia. Which is kind of a David and Goliath kind of thing. Finland and Russia have battled there was a war over their border. Russia tried to invade Finland in what's called the Winter War, and so there's been some bad blood there. But Finland is a tiny country. I mean, it's 4 million people, which is not that big. And Russia is obviously a lot bigger, and we're really dominant. Um, and in that match, so this was the 2002 Olympics, Finland actually beat Russia, and it was one of the coolest things. Like I just was going nuts because obviously I had a personal tie there. And I thought, I want to play this sport.
And how old are you now?
Like,
How old are
yeah.
you?
So at that point, let's see, I would have been almost, let's see, 73. So yeah, I was born in 73. So how old was I? I guess 30. Well, no, 30. Yeah, like almost 30. So I was
Okay.
29. Yeah. So I was like, wait a minute, I have to think through. So do some math. But yeah, so I'm almost 30. Um, and there was this little bit of problem in that I didn't know how to skate. And if you don't know how to ice skate, then hockey, you might think it's a little weird. But I was like, I want to play this. And so I I've found out that they have what's called drop-in, which drop-in is basically just pickup games of hockey. And they did it late at night, like it started at like 10:30 at night. So it actually worked out pretty well. I'd teach my LSAT class and then I could, head over to hockey. And they actually it was right by where where the thing was. So the school where I taught, it was literally like 2 blocks away was where the
Oh,
hockey rink was. Um, so um, so anyway, I just went. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna see what this is like. And show up and they'll rent you a stick and some skates, and then you had to have a helmet, so they'd rent you that as well. Um, and I I was horrible, like absolutely horrible because I didn't know how to skate, and so I was using the stick just to balance because I couldn't it was I was skating, but I was also trying to do, it wasn't like that casual, nice, go in a circle and everybody kind of, no, I mean, it's hockey. And so I fell down, uh, I don't even know how many times. And like it got to the point where, everybody comes on in shifts. So basically you'll be on for 3 minutes and then you'll be off for 3 minutes. And so you just come on and off. Um, and like I got to the point where I was just trying to stay within maybe a 15-foot radius of where our box was, where you come in and out, just because otherwise it was taking me like a minute and a half to get off the ice if I tried to go anywhere. So it was just terrible. I felt like, oh man, my team probably hates every time I go out there because I am literally just in the way. I was not even a windshield wiper to try and swat the puck. It was just balance. So I got done with that and I went, wow, I really suck at hockey. And I was like, ah, that was rough. And so I was like, that was terrible. Um, but I I wanted to learn how to play it. And so I was like, well, all right. I've got it. I got to learn how to skate. Like that's got to be my first goal is get to the point where I could stand up. So I found out other times where they just had regular skating practice and you could just go and skate. So I went to a few of those and then during that next week and then I went the next week and I could actually stay up on my skates without necessarily using, the stick for balance. So, and I was like, hey, this is a lot better. I was still horrible. Like at this point, I was kind of, what I called a windshield wiper. I couldn't move very well to the puck, but I could at least swing my stick to try and block the puck if someone was coming towards me, so I had some utility at that point, but it was a lot better and even though I was by far, and I'm talking by worlds, the worst player on the ice,
Mhm.
I was better than I had been the week before.
Mhm.
And that just made me feel good. And so I realized that I was like, wait, I still suck at hockey, but I'm less bad than I was the time before. And I realized that I was feeling joy. And kind of on a funny note, I had that time when I played, I'd forgotten to take my wallet out of my back pocket, and I was just wearing jeans. This shows you how much I knew about what I was doing. Um, and I fell on my wallet so many times. I mean, it had to be like 8 or 10 times that I landed right on that hip pocket. Um, so that when I got home, I just had this huge bruise on my butt cheek from where the wallet was. And it was funny because I had a spare key in my wallet. I'm terrible with like remembering things, so I kept a spare key to my car in my wallet, and you could actually see the outline of the key in the bruise from how many times I'd landed on it over and over and over. And so, but yeah, it was, and I was like, well, I'm a little better. And so over the course of about the next 3 years, I still kept going and I went all the time. And each time what I would do is after we play, I would ask somebody, okay, what do I need to work on? What would be one skill that I can work on this week that will be helpful? Um, and you know, one of the first things was, well, you need to know how to stop. And I was like, that is true. My way of stopping was you hit a person or the wall. Like that was how I could stop. Um, and so, he said, you got to practice stopping. I said, okay, can you show me how to do that? And he was like, yeah, sure. So, and the people were so, so nice. I mean, just really good about, and I would just be like, I just teach me one skill. I'll work on it for the week and then I'll come back and I'll try and be better at it. And so I did that over the course of, 3 years. Um, and I really was like, I was having the time of my life. And literally for the first year, I was still the worst person on the ice, at pickup. Like it didn't like, yes, I was getting better, but yeah, I mean, I was still not good at hockey.
Mhm.
But I was getting better and I loved it. And that's because it really wasn't about, like I knew I was never going to compete. I'm not going for the NHL or anything. I just wanted to be able to play hockey. I wanted to be able to do this thing. And so I just really kind of realized, well, wait a minute. So feeling joy really is just about seeing that improvement. Um, and it was actually, it's actually kind of funny because um, I, once I got to the point where I was, a really pretty solid player, I noticed that I was actually experiencing maybe less joy in playing um, than I was when I was first learning. That yeah, I was good. I got to the point where I was a pretty solid player, and yeah, I mean, your average Canadian eighth grader would have still skated, circles around me, but I was pretty good for an American, and at that point I was like, this is great exercise, but it wasn't that I was doing it as much for the joy. I mean, I still loved it. It was still lots of fun, but it was different. It changed. And that was kind of when I really started to realize, wait a minute, that what I'm seeing here is this feeling that I'm having, it's coming from the growth, not from the static of, being good
Yeah.
at something. And um, so that was kind of the eye opener for me. And I've really just started to see that in a lot of areas of my life. That what I like is getting better at things. Um, and I found that the same thing works kind of in reverse. The times when I settle into just complacency, um, I don't feel joy. Like that's when, kind of my dark mental states start to come in. And so it's that constantly just either trying to improve myself or looking to improve other people. It's funny because there have been times where I've definitely settled into very much complacency in myself. Um, but and I end up feeling like my teaching is the one thing that's bringing me, kind of that joy in my life.
Mhm.
Um, when I have kind of stopped doing things that bring growth for me, but my job by its very nature does help me to do that for other people. And so that's been, again, kind of an eye opener that, wait a minute, this is what joy is. And I think different people, can have different things. And I actually, over the last while, I've kind of come to say, when I say those that I love, I think that could probably involve things as well. I think that a lot of business leaders do experience joy from seeing growth in the companies that they
Interesting.
build
Yeah.
or lead.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they love those companies. Like they definitely can. And so I don't, while for me, it really is largely about people, I think that could apply to things as well. And I think people who, build houses, I think there's people who really get joy from that, as well. And like, so I think that it can be, um, I think that it can apply even to non-human things, but I think that it's just easier to see growth, I think with humans and things. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the core of that joy idea, and why I think, it's joy is maybe the most egalitarian thing in the world. In fact, I use this phrase and I say, that the most liberating thing that can happen to you is to really suck at something that you need to do, because you have this massive pool of joy to draw
Yeah.
from. Like you have this huge pool of improvement that you can take little sips on for a long time. And hockey was my eye opener for that. That I was like, wait, it's actually kind of nice to not be good at this because I could feel a lot of joy over and over and over with each of those improvements. And so, um, and I think you actually see that to some degree, with people. I think oftentimes some of the people that have the hardest time experiencing joy are people who start with a big head start in life.
Interesting.
They might be able to accomplish things, but I think oftentimes they struggle to feel joy, over, people who maybe started with less, in life, because they have a lot more ability for joy. And, that's not to say, as long as I just feel like if someone who starts from nothing and makes $1 million, I think it's going to experience a lot more joy than someone who, was given $5 million and makes $1 million.
Yeah.
Like, I really do think that if you looked at the joy that those two people felt, one would experience a whole lot more joy, because of the growth, that was required for that. So I do think it makes joy this really egalitarian thing. And also, I have found that the most joyful people I know are the people with the broadest circles of love, that really do love and, do a lot of things.
So lots to talk about there, but one of these ideas that I love is this potential energy. I think of you think of like in every atom, there's so much energy that if you just
Yeah.
split the atom, you can harness it. And so anytime we're on the verge of trying a new thing or we're looking at all these new things we can do, rather than think of these as like, oh, I don't want to do them because I'll be a failure, I'll be bad at them. This fixed mindset of like, if I have to work hard at this, then that means I'm no good. It's like you're missing chances to split the atom because every time you have a chance to try something new, there's just this pool, this massive pool of potential joy just waiting for you.
Yeah, and that's really kind of what I found is that that's really the what I think, and it's so difficult because, and this is where I feel like the world has become exponentially more difficult for a lot of youth and young people today because there is a culture of wanting to kind of like highlight failure, um, and mock it.
Yeah.
And so I think that people are really there's been this fear of trying new things and fear of being bad at things. When I mean that's at the core of, of really happiness. I mean it's the man in the arena speech,
Yeah.
there is no effort without failure, like it's you just are like playing hockey. You're going to fall down hundreds, if not thousands of times if you decide to play hockey, you know? Um, and that's just the way that it is. And but I do think that unfortunately, I think it's getting hard. I think people have to make a conscious effort to say, I'm not going to listen to the critics. Like I really think that the Roosevelt man in the arena speech has never been more needed than today. Like it's
Yeah.
I think that has just it's because joy is found in the arena. Joy is found in the struggle. And it's because that's where growth takes place. Um and yeah, so I think that's a part of it. And I also think another thing, that, and I think we talked about this last time just with regard to the LSAT, it's this idea that we should be comfortable all the time. That's almost become kind of like that's what I think a lot of people are looking for. They try to do things to make our lives more comfortable. Um, and I don't think that comfort actually leads to a whole lot of joy. In fact, I think it's kind of the opposite. I think um, every capability, every growth, the price of growth is discomfort, regardless of what it is. And that's the price that we pay for growth, is we have to do things that are uncomfortable. Um, and so, I think that those ideas of comfort and then being afraid to fall, those keep people from experiencing a lot of joy. Because, like you said, it's splitting the atom. I mean, you really like uh, I mean, it's hockey. Like I'm not talking about like some world-changing thing. It's not like a Nobel Prize thing. It's just hockey. It's me learning how to play hockey, and it's immense amounts of joy.
Yeah.
Um, and um, uh, at the same time, I think there's so many cool tools out there, like Duolingo. I'm like I love languages, and Duolingo is basically joy in your pocket. Like it is, you can learn a language. You can learn to communicate with people from a totally different country just by spending a little bit of time every day. And so, and you can see your improvement over time, at the end of a week, at the end of a year. So yeah, I do think that's one of the crucial things.
So I love this because I'm on a 60-day streak with Duolingo now. My
Oh, nice.
family, we're moving to we're going to we're going to spend a semester in Italy in the fall.
Oh,
And
cool.
so I'm learning Italian. I got my 60-day streak going. And
Nice.
to think back to that very first day when I was learning, I eat an apple, and it
Yeah.
was so difficult and it didn't make sense. And now it's so easy. Io
Yeah.
mangio una mela. Like it's just so easy. But to your point, there are a couple things you said I think are really interesting. One, we have to take time to recognize the growth.
Yeah.
That's important. And then Sarah Blakely, she's founder of Spanx, one of the
Yeah.
richest women in the world, right? one of the fastest rises to wealth ever. And she shares this story. You probably heard it, where her dad would routinely ask her and the other her siblings, what did you fail at today? Because if they weren't failing at things, then they weren't pushing themselves. And so he would get upset if they didn't have a good answer of things they'd failed at.
Huh, that is awesome. I hadn't heard that story. That is fantastic. So I think that's great. I'm excited. Where are you going to be in Italy?
Oh, so we're going to be up by Venice. So our youngest daughter is actually named
Oh,
Venice because
nice.
we already
Uh-huh.
love Italy. And my dad
Yeah.
served a church mission in Italy, and he was in
Uh-huh.
Verona and Florence. And so, yeah, we're going to be in a town of like 2,000 people at the base of the Dolomites for
Oh,
3 months. So,
oh,
and
that's gonna be
Duolingo, we're all
awesome.
learning Duolingo together, and
Yeah.
we're all doing
Yeah.
quests together. And it is just a ton of potential joy just sitting in our pockets.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to follow you because Italian's what I'm working on right now too.
Oh, very cool. Yes,
So I've
let's
done
connect.
I've done some other languages, but we went and lived in Italy for a month, just in Rome, just a year ago. So we spent
Oh,
last
very
January,
cool.
December and January we were in Rome. And it was awesome. But I was like, and I that happened a little more suddenly, so I didn't get a chance to learn it as well. But I'm like, oh, but yeah, that'll be such a fun experience. So um,
It,
and yeah, like that learning,
yeah,
like you probably like if you look at the drills that you're doing on Duolingo right now, and then you look at the beginnings and you think back and say, wait a minute, I remember when I was having to, sound it like yo, like
yeah,
and just getting the pronunciation was weird. And now you can feel it roll off your tongue. Um,
yeah.
and there's something just cool about that.
When I see the word manjo, and
Yeah,
my brain just wants to say Joe instead of how, in English, how would we even pronounce that?
yeah,
Mangio, mangio.
yeah.
It's just so
Mangio.
fun to like see
Yeah,
manjo, and I just know to say
manjo,
manjo. Yeah,
manjo. Well, and what's cool is you're probably getting to that point where when you see the word, there's no translation that happens. You just think about eating
yeah, yeah,
itself. Like the the physical act is connected to the word, not that the word is connected to an English word, which is then connected to the act. And
yeah.
that's kind of the critical piece, that I feel like that's when things start to click. I love languages, so that's one of my big ones. Um I studied German, well, Spanish in junior high, German in high school, French in college, then went and lived in Finland.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and so I've gotten to exposed to a lot. And so, um, yeah, I am a fan of Duolingo. So it's been a lot of fun getting that.
Well,
So
and if language is a good example of this, because when you start, that very first day of Duolingo, you are so bad, which
yeah,
means there's this massive potential for joy. And I love this insight you have about how whatever has happened with society in terms of discouraging failure, that is really discouraging people from tapping into this joy. I love this
yeah,
book written by a couple of Japanese authors called The Courage to Be Disliked. And I recorded a 5-minute podcast just with kind of some of their main ideas. And I assign it to my students in leadership, in part because many leadership tends to be a lonely
yeah,
job, and you have to make difficult decisions that are going to, make people dislike you. But I think this is such an important trait to have, muscle to strengthen, to have the courage to be disliked. And if we can have that courage, we're unlocking all this potential for joy, because we're going to be okay being bad at things or not being liked by others.
yeah. Well, and it's an interesting thing because, I think languages are a great example. Like like a lot of times I mean, you'll see people making fun of people trying to speak a new language, but I'm sort of like, well, but why don't we make fun of little kids? I
Yeah,
mean, they're really bad at language at the
yeah,
beginning. They
yeah,
say, but we think it's really wonderful and adorable, you know? And so I think sometimes we need to be a little gentler with both ourselves. I think, I certainly would be like, oh, you know, and be a little frustrated with myself when I would miss things on, Duolingo or different things. And I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, that's not how I would feel. Like if a little kid makes a grammar mistake,
yeah,
you're
it'd be
like,
way nicer.
oh, yeah, and what we see it when they do make those mistakes, we see it as a chance to say, oh, yeah, let me explain this. This is why it is what it is. And we see it as a good thing, which that's really kind of the way that all of our mistakes probably we should see. You know, there's it's actually kind of a funny thing. This is a, you know, uh, Jack Welch, GE story, that there was a situation where, one of the vice presidents had made a decision and was like, I think this is the direction we go. Ended up costing the company, about $11 million. And it was a mistake, but he thought this thing would work and it didn't, and it cost the company, $11 million. So he walked in with his resignation letter. And Jack Welch, was like, what? He's like, you think I would possibly let you quit when I just spent $11 million
Yeah.
educating
On your education.
you? So like, and that, that idea, like him or hate him, like that has always stuck with me. Like, look, mistakes are just part of education, like,
Yeah.
and, so I think that's a good one, but I'll have to get that courage to be disliked.
Yeah, lots of great ideas. And to your point, the closer we get to mastery, the less room there is for joy. Or if you could imagine, I believe this is from your book. If we're perfect, how much
Yeah,
potential for joy from ourselves is there, from our
yeah.
own potential growth?
Yeah, it really is one where, I joke about being an imperfectionist because if things are perfect, the only place they can go is down.
Yeah,
And so you almost live in this state of fear, like I kind of see perfection, it'd be essentially I kind of feel like being perfect at something is sort of like having to play a game where your only two options are to tie or lose, you know.
yeah,
If you stay perfect, that feels like a tie. If you aren't perfect, that feels like a loss. Nobody wants to play a
yeah.
game where your two options are, well, you tie or you
I
lose.
lose.
Like, that's a miserable game, Um, So, but yeah, it's one where I do think that's a critical piece.
Okay,
So,
so we talked about joy, and one of the ways is through seeing growth in ourselves. But as you said, there's the other way, and that's desiring joy for someone else. So you talk about love. When you think about this, you tell your daughter you love her. Why is that so important? How do you think about love, and how
yeah.
does that contribute to joy?
So, so it's funny because for me that actually does. Um, I mean, it almost becomes circular slash tautological. Um, that I do think that loving someone does mean just desiring joy for them, that you
Okay.
do want that good. And obviously there's different layers, there's different levels of love. And but that I do think that's kind of what's at the core of it. And so I do separate, I don't see, I think a lot of what we think of as love, and what we may refer to as love, I think in some cases isn't. I think there's a lot of things that may not be, but I really do think love means that we want joy for someone else. And obviously, in like a romantic type relationship, hopefully we believe that we can be a source of that joy or growth for that person. I feel like that in the best situations that is the case, and that's when it really is something that I would classify as love, when it is focused on the joy, the growth, the happiness of that other person. um, but I think that when we have that, then that leads us to act in ways that build towards that growth. And that's why, like that the situation with my daughter, it wouldn't be loving of me to just say, well, you're a little nervous about this dance class. That's fine. You can just dance in the kitchen, because that would be robbing her of that
Mhm.
growth. And so love, because it's tied into that concept of helping others experience joy, that does mean sometimes we're going to push people and ask them to do hard things, that are for their growth. And I think every parent experiences that. Like I think that's, one of the things that is kind of at the core of being a good parent. Um, So let me just close my door real quick. But so, and I think that um I do think that having that love for others, like I said, I think the happiest people really are the people who do love the most. I think that they experience the most joy in their lives. And again, it goes back to that pool. Um, and one of the chapters that I didn't have in there, but that I did just sent you, the other was that has to start with loving ourselves, and um, and that it's because as I've thought more about this lately, especially, I think that sometimes um, when I'm in kind of a negative place and when I'm not taking actions to improve myself, there's probably a problem with how I feel about myself. That a lot of times I'm not like, there's a problem with how I see and view myself. And that can become a downward spiral pretty quickly for me. Like if I'm not feeling good about myself, then I stop doing the things that lead to growth and joy,
Mhm.
which then keeps me in that stagnant spiral, and I don't like that person that I'm being. And so I can harm that relationship with myself. And I think that that idea of loving ourselves enough to do the hard things that will bring growth, just like when we love other people, we encourage them to do the things that will bring them growth. But I think that's kind of that core concept. I think love in that sense is a motivating factor. So it's definitely more, I don't know, it's more both more detailed and more broad. I mean, I can love thousands of people. I love my students. I just am so proud when they get their scores. I mean, I do get choked up when they send me emails about how the test went and different things, either because it was hard for them or because, they did really well. I think that love in that sense, like I said, you can just love a lot more people. And, um, and there again, I think sometimes um, we've maybe narrowed what we talk about in terms of love. So I apply that a lot more broadly to society, and just I think we recognize there's different degrees of love. Obviously, I
Mhm.
love my wife a lot more than I love my students, um, but it's just there's a different thing there, and what it boils down to is for my wife, I'm willing to do an enormous amount to help her feel joy. And for my students, I will do a lot, but not as much as I would
Yeah.
for my wife. And so there can be degrees there, but I do think it's helpful to just say, look, yeah, I love these people, and that's a good thing, because I think and I talk about this a little bit in the book. I think we've gotten away from saying it, and that's telling people that we love them, and I think that's a hard thing. As much as I love Finland, there's kind of a saying among a bunch of Finnish men. They're like, well, you know, I I'll tell my wife I love her on the day we get married, and then if that changes, I'll let her know.
Oh, okay.
And it's like,
Oh, wow.
it's like you can just know. And some of that is that the Finns are maybe one of the most stoic people on earth. They just kind of plug away. Um, but I do think that there really is something powerful about knowing and hearing that you're loved. And so that's part of why I want to tell my kids that often, is that I want them to hear it. Like
Mhm.
hearing that we are loved, I think has a powerful impact on that. And I think that it's also um, I think that feeling loved enables us to have the courage to do hard things. And that's part of why I feel like it's important for me to say that right before my kids go off to do things, is that I want them to. I think that when we come from a place of feeling loved, we are less afraid of failure. Um, as long as we know, and I think that's important um, that we know that that love isn't conditional upon our
Performance.
success.
Yeah.
yeah, or on our performance. That can be, I think, really debilitating, in the same way that feeling just loved regardless, that that's important, and that it's part of why I think there's and I think it's now I'm trying to remember. I think Carol Dweck talks about this in mindset, but the idea of focusing on the work that people do and their effort
Yeah.
when we are praising them is a lot more powerful than focusing on the outcome of that work. That and I've found that as students on the LSAT, what I really am proud of is not scores. It's the work that people put in. That's what really impresses me.
Improvement,
Is
right? It
Yeah,
gets back to this idea of joy. If you're just
yeah,
praising the outcome,
yeah,
then you're missing all this joy that they were in feeling along the way.
yeah. And it's, the it really is like someone who comes into the class at a 130 and finishes at a 160. I'm just that brings me more joy than someone who comes in at a 171 and ends up at a 178,
Yeah.
even though 178 is a much better score. Um, and it does change their outcomes. But that 130 to 160, first off, I know what kind of effort that took. And second, they're they just are a lot different as a thinker from that to,
Yeah.
from between those 2 points.
Yeah.
And so it's, I do think that's, the case. But so yeah, I think love is like that really does become it's the source of joy when we love other people and we can see that growth.
So something you said that I think is really profound is that feeling loved makes us empowered because you can imagine the opposite. Someone who feels no love, how empowered could they possibly feel? Right?
Yeah,
And how afraid of failure would you be if you don't feel any love? So I feel like just by considering the opposite, it's like, oh yeah, that is a really powerful equation that the more we feel loved, the more likely we are to feel empowered, to take action, the less afraid we'll feel of failure, the more open and willing we'll be to try new things, to encounter more joy.
yeah. And I do think I think that that plays a big role on micro levels and on macro levels. I do think that that can kind of become a cyclical thing. And really just feeling loved, it gives us that safe space. The chapter, interestingly, that I shared I actually reworked some of the stuff and added a little more detail on the love creates space for growth, where I talked about my grandparents, um, and it really, that was it really is. They are one of the people that I think are a great example of that. Like it really is like every time my grandpa, even when my dad was in, his 50s and my grandpa was old, every time my grandpa would see my dad, he would say, "Man, you look handsome. You are a good-looking kid." Just
Wow.
all the time. I mean, he was just, and this is my dad in his 50s, this isn't a teenager who needs, but he just did that. And, um, and I think that was one of the things, and my grandma too, that um they just yeah, they just really thought the best. I spent a summer with them and literally heard hundreds and hundreds of hours of stories about, my dad and his brothers.
Mhm.
They were all boys, and I never heard them say anything negative or unkind about any of the boys in all that time. And yeah, they told stories about different things. They um, they accidentally and you'll appreciate this. So my grandpa was the color announcer for Idaho State.
Uh-huh.
So we'd go play our Turkey Bowl, Thanksgiving Day thing at the mini dome because he had a key
Oh yeah.
growing up, and so we'd get to play in there. But one time this is when the boys were younger, and it was, 4th of July, and they were setting off fireworks, and they'd just gone down to the parking lot there because it was a big open space. And um, anyway, they put two bottle rockets in a bottle at the same time and lit them. And the first one knocked it over, and the second one
Oh,
shot into the bushes surrounding the mini dome. It burned the bushes and burned a little bit of the side of the building and stuff. Fortunately, it's not, it wasn't the most flammable thing. They were able to get it out. But, the fire department had to come and all those things. So even talking about that, Grandpa just was like, well, and that's, they learned that you only put one bottle rocket in the bottle at a time. Like that was his takeaway. And I was like, it just really stuck with me that was kind of what he did. And my dad was really good at this too. Even when I would do really stupid stuff, he would say, "So what did you learn?" You know? And that idea that, if we feel loved and that the people who around us are going to see even our mistakes as just opportunities for learning, that really does create a space for growth and empowers us to grow. And I talk about this a little bit in the chapter with about my dad. So, like they're boys, they have two that ended up being lawyers, two that ended up being doctors. One was a physicist for NASA, and the other was a vice president at HP. And so pretty solid. I mean, really good outcomes, but that wasn't what my grandparents said they felt like was their greatest accomplishment was that their boys loved each other. Like
wow.
my my parents, they go on a trip with my dad's siblings every couple of years, and they just rotate through, and each brother gets to pick something. So, one brother was like, I want to go to New Zealand. So they went to New Zealand, and they all had this big, they just rented this huge motorhome, like six of them. And they just had a blast going around. And so, um, and these are, grown men. And so it's just, it's an interesting thing that, you know, you, they really did feel like that the love that they created between their children was their greatest accomplishment, even though they were all very accomplished,
Yeah. So do you think it's reasonable then to assume the best in people?
I do. Well, um, yes. So this is an interesting thing. I do. It's funny because I joke about, I joke with my wife that I'm a delusional optimist. And my wife hates the term because she's like, delusional is bad. Um, but I think that to a lot of people, I do. Um, my view on people is not based in um, proof, but more based in that's how I choose to see them. And so that's kind of what I think. So, um, kind of the way that I see it. First off, I think people who see the best in others um, are going to tend to be happier. First off, I think it does help us avoid some of the problems with that mind reading idea
Yeah.
that we talked about at the
Yeah.
beginning. Um, I have really found that some of my some of the moments that I am where I was at my worst were when I didn't assume the best in people. Um, and when I failed to do that. And some of my most joyful moments are when I did. And so seeing the best in people, I think is helpful from an empowering standpoint. I talked about my grandparents. They really, my uncles are not perfect. Like I know that. I've seen their lives and they've gone through struggles just like everybody else. Okay. They've, you know, it's been tough. And, multiple uncles have been divorced multiple times and have gone through difficult things. They've had, business difficulties. It's not that they're without problems. It's just how they were viewed and that my grandparents really did see the best in them. Um, and and that choosing to see that and choosing to see people that way, I think it's reasonable because I think it is the most likely thing to yield a positive outcome. And it's likely to lead to good in the way that I see it, that growth or joy in the universe. Um, Whether or not it is accurate. And I can, I can't remember if I talk about this in the version that I had sent you, but there's a couple of possibilities. I could think the worst and be wrong. In which case, those have been some of the moments where I felt
Yeah.
really horrible.
You don't want to be
Uh,
there.
yeah. That I don't know if you're if you watch the show Psych,
Uh,
but
oh yeah.
I love the show Psych.
Yeah.
In a lot of the early episodes, both Sean and Gus, they basically sabotage potential relationships by assuming that, their potential love interest is the killer, and it kills it. Like there's no way that that's going to go anywhere.
I just have to
Like
say too, my daughter and I, my oldest daughter, Kyla and I, we've made it through pretty much all the psychs, definitely the last few seasons.
yeah,
But so we do love psych, and yeah,
yeah.
that's so great. Yeah,
And
assuming
it
the
and it
worst.
happens over and over. Like before you get the, Sean and Juliet thing, spoiler, sorry. Then but that's kind of the basis of a lot of the early shows. Um, so so that's a really bad outcome. So this is almost like, it's almost like a game theory kind of idea here, but so you assume the worst and you're wrong. That's a really bad outcome. You could assume the worst and you're right. And I feel like that's at neutral at best. You're like, well, yeah, I thought that was going to happen, but there's no joy there.
Yeah.
So basically, what you end up with is a -1 total. So if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, and then, you have either sort of a -1 from assuming the worst and being wrong, or a 0 of assuming the worst and being right. Um, or you can assume the best and be right. And I think that's a +1. Or you can assume the best and be wrong. And that really, I feel like, is about a 0 anyway, because the outcome is about the same. And so from a personal kind of like, you have one side which has a -1 and a 0, and the other that has a +1. And even if you value choosing to see the best and being wrong as a -1, you still have a net of 0 on
Yeah.
that side instead of a net of -1. I'll take the 0 over the -1,
Yeah.
like the chance of positive. Um, but the second thing is, I think that there is real power in when people see the best in me, I perform differently. It really does help me to be better. And so I think that seeing the best in others, loving them, is maybe the greatest gift we can give to them. And choosing to see that, um, even when maybe we don't have evidence from their past to support that. Um, there's and I think that there's, I mean, we this is why is Les Mis so powerful? What we have is, Jean Valjean really, when the story starts, the bishop has 0 reason to see the good in him. And this is where I think the book is even more powerful
Yeah.
than although they needed an editor. Like the unabridged is painful.
There's an
There's
800-page abridged that's like
yeah,
perfect. I've
yeah,
made it through the
that's
1200 or whatever, and yeah, it was just
yeah.
it's
No, there's a
so
reason
fast.
why we don't need that. Like they got paid by the word, so
Yeah.
it is long. We don't need to know the history of the cul-de-sac. In 112 pages or whatever it is. So, um, but or the history of the cemetery, like
Yeah.
things like that. You're like, well, we don't need that. But there really is something about, like, we really see the bishop. He has 0 evidence. In fact, he has evidence to say this is a criminal. Like he has every evidence for it because Jean Valjean just stole from him, and he was on parole for stealing. And the bishop knows that. So he has two pieces of evidence. And yet he chooses to believe. He chooses to see the best. Um, and then we contrast that with Javert, who simply cannot see the good and only sees the bad. And I think that that's, at its heart, that is one of the most powerful things, with the book. Um, and I guess I'd just rather be the bishop,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, maybe that means sometimes people might take advantage because, yeah, he lost the silver. Like, yes, he's out something. Javert never lost something directly to, no physical objects to Valjean, but he lost himself. And and I think that when we choose to see the best, even if sometimes, yeah, there might be situations where people take advantage of us or whatever, I still would rather be the bishop.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
And
like, oh no, go ahead.
yeah, just both from the standpoint of for who I want to be, and also, we see in the story, the bishop is that love and belief in Valjean that leads to the change. So, and so I do think from that standpoint, it is rational to see the best, even if you don't have
Mm.
evidence for it, which may sound like a little bit of a contradiction, but it's one where I'm like, I think it's still you can say it's rational to believe.
Yeah. So well, I love this phrase of how, or this idea of, I think love might be the greatest gift we can give another person.
Yeah.
The way it empowers them, it leads to potential for joy. Your so thinking through this, joy. You've got an interesting equation, I guess I should say, right? For
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
so, how did you come up with this equation, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, it was funny because I had totally forgotten about that equation until I was reading through it again, and I was like, "Oh, yeah." And so it's funny because it's basically the that essentially our joy is a function of, and I'm trying to remember which letters I put to it again. So, um, because it's in that.
Yeah, I was thinking a G and an L for growth and love.
Yeah. So, um, but anyway, that our joy gets amplified. Like growth um, equals. Now I'm trying to find it. Let me let me do this search tool in here because um, um, there we go. Yeah. So joy equals growth times love. Um, and so, but I do think that that it's more than just um that it's more than just a multiplication. I do think it is exponential, and that the greater love that we feel, that increases exponentially. So when we feel joy, like I do think it does come down to how much growth are we seeing does affect it. Like I feel a lot of joy when I see, and if you think about a lot of people, people feel a lot of joy at weddings because I feel like that feels like a really big growth step. It's a moment where we recognize, wait a minute, this person is growing in a way, like they're creating a new family relationship. And so that feels like this major growth. And the closer that we are to the people that we're seeing get married, the more joy that we feel. And so I do think it's the love portion though that I think has the exponential factor on it, so sort of that, J equals GL squared. Because I do think that the more that we love, the more powerful that feeling is. That when we really love someone, even small gains bring us a lot of joy. I think, that in all reality, the first time that a baby smiles or their first word, I mean, they're going to say millions of words over their lifetime. So why is that first word such a big deal? It's we see it as growth, but I think it's that parents, it is this most amazing experience because of the love that they feel for that child, and when you see your own children, I definitely feel more joy when I see my children experiencing that growth. And I think it's because that love factor is exponential. So yeah, I think, that becomes kind of the joy, the equation, for it. And
Which is so interesting because the Einstein equation, E equals mc squared, it wasn't until, I was out of high school that I really kind of internalized what that equation means. That
yeah,
energy equals the mass times c squared. Well, what is c? C is the speed of light.
yeah,
C is a massive number.
these are
C
huge
is
numbers.
this incomprehensible number almost squared, which now
Yeah,
becomes an incomprehensibler number
yeah, and
multiplied by the mass. So any tiny little bit of mass has unbelievable energy. And that's why I love your equation is okay, we got the joy. So the potential for joy, i- i- growth, yeah, that makes sense. But love, like you say, is the exponential. So the more we love, and we have more ability to love than we do have ability to just personally grow, right? And
yeah,
the more we love, the more that's the exponential, and the more access we have to G as well, because we can now derive value from their G. Uh, so I just love this equation.
yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing is I do, and I feel like it's the love is kind of that at the heart of that source of power. Like it's in the same way, it's the really big thing,
Yeah.
in the same way that the speed of light, because yeah, speed of light, it's a big number,
Yeah.
that is like bigger than what we can comprehend, you know. So
Okay.
um so
This is
I
all.
and it's because like I said, I had forgotten about that until I went back to the book this last time. I was like, oh, that's really good. So
No, it's good stuff. It's great. Okay, let's transition now to the final two. So well, let's transition to fun first. We don't
yeah,
need to cover two at once. So having fun, and you came up with this, uh, as you said, suitably pretentious phrase
yeah.
for fun, for your calling, given your educational background. So anyway, how did you come up
Yeah.
with this idea of fun as being so important?
So it's actually like I think I've always just I've liked to play, and I think that it's I find fun in different things, and um but I one of the things was I found um that adding fun, is a big deal. And kind of the moment where I kind of looked at it more closely, I was taking a class from, so Shauna, my wife, and I would take a class together when she was in grad school. And so I was taking it was the business school ethics course at BYU. So for the MBA ethics course. Um, because she didn't want to take any philosophy classes. So we would take whatever classes she was doing, we'd do one of them together. So it was the MBA ethics class, and the teacher, Dr. Hart, um, had us read a book about finding your daimon or your calling, and sort of what is it that you were born to do? Like what is your special gift? What is your calling? So I spent a lot of time on it, and anyway, I came up with this, I finally got the paper and I was like, I am, and I used the phrase, the actualizer of potential fun. I thought that sounded, pretty cool, and I could write that in a paper and, stuff. So I wrote all about it, talked about, some experiences that I'd had, and when I really felt like I was being my best self, it was, kind of that finding fun and taking things that might not be fun and turning them into things that were fun. Um, but and I really do feel like that, there is a gift to that. It was actually a little funny. He sent the paper back, and I thought for sure I'd get an A, and he didn't give me an A on it, because he wrote on it. He was like, oh, "It's well written, but you missed it." He said, "Your diamond is to teach." And at the time, I was planning to go to law school, and I wanted to do, corporate transactional M&A kind of stuff. And I was like, no, I'm not going to be a teacher. And lo and behold, here I am. And he was right. Like he was spot on. Like, and it was one of those moments where I'm like, sometimes you want to find mentors who know you better than you know yourself.
Yeah.
Because he really did. Like he saw clearly that where I would find greatest joy is teaching. And I didn't know that about myself. And but he did, and he was spot on.
Can I
And
interrupt you there, Brent?
yeah. Mhm.
Do you have any idea how he saw that in you? Like, did you ever ask him how he knew that
Um,
about you?
yeah, no, he just well, it was funny because he said, some of it was like even some of the people in the class would, you know, there in the class there was this little joke that there would be times in the lecture where it would just be he and I having a conversation.
Yeah.
Like and some of it he said, he's like, I see aspects of me in you, and it's the aspects of me that I love as a teacher.
Mm.
So he recognized that. And he said, look, I've seen, he worked in a faculty, like, and he just said, you, you're at your core, you are like us. Like you really do. Like you'll just be a great teacher. That's what will bring you joy. And he said, it's just that's what it is. And he said the people who love teaching, he was like, they're like us. He loved teaching,
Cool.
just and was great at it. But um, and his son, is a professor and teaches and stuff. So um he just said, look, I recognize this, so um anyway, so that's but I use the example, and I talk a little bit about this in the book. So one of the best, like, in Finland, we were on bicycles. We're riding our bikes all over the place, which in Finland is not optimal because it's icy. And while I was there, they came out with the rule that we had to go get helmets. Um, and now everybody's like, well, you didn't wear helmets. Look, I mean, nobody wore helmets.
Yeah.
Okay, like everybody biked without helmets. We rode in the back of pickup trucks and all those things. We didn't wear seatbelts, whatever. Um, so it was a different time. So the rule came out that we had to get helmets. So I was in this little tiny town, a couple of thousand people, and the only place that had any sort of sporting goods. It wasn't even a full sporting goods store. It was just a little part of another store. Um, they in this town when the rule came out about getting helmets. So we went, and the only helmets they had were like for little kids. So I went there and I asked if they had helmets, and they were like, "Well, how old is the kid?" And I was like, "No, it's for me." We're like, we don't really have adult helmets." And they were like, "But you can see if one of these fits you." And um, the helmet I still have it actually.
Oh,
Like
do you
I've seen,
really?
yeah. So
Amazing.
I'll send you a picture of it because I still have it because
Yeah,
I
I'd
keep
love
it
to see
because
it.
it was a significant thing. Um, if we were doing a video thing on this, I'd pop it up on the screen. But I so um this helmet it was just pastel pink. And here I am, 19-year-old boy. Pastel pink is not exactly, the color that I'm hoping for. And it's not like a normal bike helmet that looks like aerodynamic. Like it has a little bill that comes out, and then it literally came down in the back and then kind of came over the ears. Like it looked like the helmets that they put on people who have seizures to kind of
Yeah.
prevent them from hitting their heads. I mean, it's not an attractive helmet. Like it looked dumb. Like and there was just no way around it. And I saw that helmet and I was like, this, and there was a blue one, but the blue one was the small. And so I couldn't even get the blue version. Um, and I was like, oh, but I ended up saying, you know what? It is what it is. Like, there's a rule. I agreed to follow the rules here, so I'm going to follow this rule. So I got the helmet, and in Finland, when you first get your driver's license, you're only allowed to drive 80 kilometers an hour. And anytime you're driving, you have to have this sticker on the back of your car, and it's like this big. I mean, it's a 1 foot diameter sticker. It's huge that says 80 on it, and it's yellow with black letters. And anyway, so I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna put one of those stickers on the helmet. And it covers most of the helmet. Like you'll see it when I send you the picture because it literally is the bulk of the helmet is this, big 80 sticker. Um, but I was like, oh, that'll be funny. And, I had to cut it a little bit because the sticker is a circle and it was going on like a spherical kind of helmet. So I had to cut it to make it so that it laid down flat. Um, but but you can clearly see it's the 80 sticker. And I was like, oh, that makes it kind of fun. Like it's kind of funny, like, oh, I'm new. I can only drive,
Yeah.
bike because obviously I'm never going to go that fast. But I was like, oh, this just seems kind of like a fun thing. It ended up people would stop and honk, they'd wave, they'd talk, they'd be like, that's hilarious. And we ended up just making friends because of that helmet, like, and people would be like, that's hilarious. Like, what made you think of that? And so that helmet that could have potentially been, like, okay, there's not a lot of potential joy in a helmet, or potential fun, but I was able to find a way to make it fun.
Yeah.
And, later when we got into the winter time, winter, you're on a bike and you're on ice. So you crash a lot. And so, this is something you'll appreciate with your football background. Growing up, whenever, and I don't think they do it as much anymore. But, when you made a great play, you'd get a sticker. They'd have
Yeah.
stickers that
Yeah.
they put on their helmet. And you could see, some people that have a lot of stickers on their helmet. So I was like, let's just get stickers. And every time we crash, we get to put a sticker
New
on the helmet.
stickers.
So, like, you could kind of see who had crashed a lot, but it made it so, and so, I got some for me and I gave them out to all of the people, the other, missionaries in our area. And we would hand them out, like every week. Like, you take a picture every time you crashed, and then you get to hand it out, like, so it ended up making it so that even crashing on our bikes
Fun.
started to be kind of this fun thing, and that there was at least some way to do it. And I don't know, I mean, it's a little Mary Poppins and, like, spoonful of sugar kind of thing, you know but um but I do think, I actually think there's a lot of truth to it. Like, you can find fun in a lot of different things. And um so that's kind of become, what I've, kind of a mantra for my life is like, look to have fun. Um, and when I'm my best self, I'm totally doing that. And I can tell when I'm not because I fight the fun. Like, I actually make my own life worse by choosing not to have fun and
Yeah.
resisting that. So,
Well,
uh,
it makes me think of going back to the E equals MC squared. There's so much more energy in a rock than we realize. And you're saying, I see the potential for fun, and so I'm going to actualize it.
yeah.
And we're going to tap into this. So there's so many more situations that there's so much more fun to be had in situations than we often realize. And you had a great example with cheese, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, like, and I mean, and I can go both ways. Like I said, in those cases, I did a good job of choosing to see the fun. And there are also times where I go the opposite direction. And I just, for whatever reason, I'm being stubborn and stupid. And so every 6 months, I love cheese, like, maybe a little bit in a weird way. Like, and so every 6 months, I do what's called Cheese Fest. And Cheese Fest is exactly what it sounds like. It is a party at my house with different cheeses. I'll spend a month before trying different cheeses and making different things to go with them. And then for 2 days, I'll just prep all of the cheeses for Cheese Fest. And so it's the first weekend of April and the first weekend of October, which makes it easy to remember when it is. And it's Sunday afternoon. And so we just have friends come over and we just eat cheese. And, I make little cards that tell about the cheese and about the different things for it. Um, but and it really is this joy. Like I love doing it. But there was a year where I was mad about, I don't even remember what I was upset about, but I was frustrated with some other things. And I just was like, ugh, I'm gonna do this. But I didn't like my heart wasn't in it. My wife was like, "Oh, well, we'll just do it anyway. You love it and things." And so, but I was just being stubborn and kind of an ass. And so I just went through the motions of it, and it was miserable. Like there was no fun in it, and people didn't like it. And afterwards, as I looked back on it, I was like, that was 100% just my fault. Like it didn't. It could have been fun if
Yeah.
I had just not like been my best self instead of my worst self about it. Like I could have been all in because there are tons of cheese fests. We end up laughing and people like we're literally like just doubled over laughing for hours, while we're eating cheese and telling stories. And this one, people came, it was over within about an hour and a half, and everybody just kind of left. And I was like, wow, I literally just sucked all of the fun out of this
At a cheese fest.
activity. Yeah. Like, and um and so I've realized that, I have to be careful with that. Um, because I'm not sure that I was totally off based on, that one of my callings is to find fun in simple things. Um, because I do think that that is, part of the core of who I am. Um, but I can still go against that. Like if I choose, I can still fight it. Like I don't have to find joy or fun. Like those are choices, and I can choose to go that way or I can choose to go against it. And that's been, like I said, in the book, I've tried to share both the good and the bad, because I think I've learned a lot from the bad. That was an experience where, again, it seems simple, but I really created like this, and I feel like I kind of, you know, I betrayed who I was, like,
Yeah.
yeah, people who came expecting to have a good time like they always had at Cheese Fest, and it wasn't. But it was more that I betrayed who I am at my core. That's not who I want to be. Um, but so yeah, I do think that fun, it's we create it. And I like to use the example like what we see as fun is largely a choice. Um, like if I were to say, yeah, does it sound like fun to go out in the middle of a hot summer day with, a 30-pound bag of metal on your back and walk around for a couple of miles and try to do something crazy frustrating the whole time? No, but that's golf. Um, like that's literally what it is. Like you go out on a hot summer day in the middle of the day with a big bag of clubs on your back that you're carrying while you hike around this grass, and you try to hit this little ball into a little tiny hole hundreds of yards away. And it's frustrating as all get out.
Yeah.
There are all these rules to make it harder, you know, like they literally put things to make it harder to do that. But people pay hundreds of dollars to do it, and they love it because they've decided that it's fun. Um, and they've embraced it. And so anyway, I do think that there is this element of we can choose to see something as fun or we can not. And sometimes I do a good job of choosing to see fun in the things that I have to do, and sometimes I don't. But having fun, that is one of the things I hope that my children and people learn to kind of say, this is something that I have to do, and I can choose to have it be fun.
Yeah.
Like, um, Mark Twain has the quote, work is anything that a body, what's his phrase? It's something work is that which a body is required to do, and play is that which a body is not required to do. Um, so or compelled to do. I think it says compelled. So even in the things that we do have to do, we can still choose to see them as play. And I think that a lot of the people who are most successful, even in their work, do see it as an element of play. You know, that like they find the fun in their work.
I love the idea of just choosing to have fun. It's a choice. The example you give of golf as a choice to be
Yeah,
fun is spot on. One of the ways that, in my mind, we have fun is through humor. And in my leadership class, you know, humor is positively correlated with leadership effectiveness. Now, it doesn't mean it causes it, of course, but there is a
yeah,
positive correlation between effective leaders and humor. And sadly, uh, humor researchers, which there are humor researchers, um,
yeah.
it shows that like when we're young, we laugh a lot, and then we get into our 20s and 30s and we don't, and it goes off a cliff. But then it comes back around when we're 70 or 80, which is sad because not much time left. And so some of the research shows that some of people's biggest regrets at the end of their life is that they didn't laugh as much as they would have liked to. And so I feel like for you, it seems humor is one of these ways that you choose to have fun.
Yeah. And it's, it's interesting. It's also correlated with learning outcomes, like
Right.
that, when we laugh, we remember, like it's, the like laughter helps us remember things. And it's funny because there's very few things that we tend to remember word for word, but jokes, we remember all kinds of jokes word for word.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
and and there's a lot of things, so basically, laughter and music, those are two of the things that are really highly correlated with, with better
Definitely.
memory outcomes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and I feel like that is one of my goals, as I'm teaching is, I feel like if we didn't laugh, then I kind of failed a little bit in the lecture. So, um, I try to make sure that we laugh, and because there's funny things all over the place, and just that ability to laugh and let go is so. I mean, it's correlated with so many positive outcomes, like laughter. There's a reason that people study it now
Yeah.
because we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually really good for us. But but yeah, I do think that choice to find the fun and choice to laugh um, is really critical, and I think it's helpful for happiness. I think it also helps us to see. I think it helps us grow as well, and to see joy because if we can't laugh at the mistakes, then you know, it, then they're just painful. And even dumb stuff, like it's one where, I always start off my, I start off my classes and we do introductions, and I always share the same thing, which is, that, I say, like, I don't have a great short-term memory. I really forget what I'm doing. And I explain, kind of the best evidence for that is I have driven away from a gas pump with the hose still in the car. And everybody kind of chuckles. And then I say 4 times. And then they really laugh because people are like, whoa, because they're just shocked by that. And I am actually a little shocked by that to this day. I'm like, "Hey, have I done that? Um, but but that's, like it is funny. Like driving away from a gas hose with the pump still in, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's embarrassing if I choose to see it that way, but it's also kind of funny. And so again, I can choose to say, well, I'm not going to tell anybody about that and just be secretly embarrassed about it. Or I can just own it and say, yeah, I've done this. It's part of what makes,
And sorry, let me interrupt you real quick. And then 14 years later, when one of your students interviews you on
yeah,
his podcast, that's the very first story he remembers and brings up, like
right,
I did in the first round we did just 2 weeks
right.
ago.
Exactly. And you remember it. And
Yeah.
and I think it also, I mean, I think it's helpful for a number of reasons. It gets people laughing, but I think it also says this is a safe place to make mistakes and to talk about mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that when we add laughter, good healthy laughter, not mocking laughter, but just good healthy laughter, I think that too creates this just good element of it relieves stress, it does all those other things, but it creates that same space where it says, we're okay to laugh. Like that's just fine. And there too, I think that we obviously don't want to hurt people's feelings, but I think we've got to just say it's okay to laugh. Like there's things that are funny. And that's just, you know, part of what it is. So, um, but yeah, and even now, like that the gas hose thing, it is funny. Um, and even the most embarrassing one where there was a highway patrolman on the other side and I got a field sobriety test. Like it's funny, looking back. At the time it wasn't as funny, but if I can look back on it and laugh, then that's good. And even dumb, bigger dumb stuff, like I, you know, I don't know if I talked about snow kayaking last time, but
No, I don't think so.
oh, so like there's so my daughter's high school boyfriend, um, it's actually kind of funny. So he had to come back home for a little bit for to get surgery on his thumb because he had broken it. And so while he was home, I was like, we just would go on what we call our Wednesday wanders, and we just go wander in the mountains and do whatever. So we'd just go hike around on Wednesday afternoons. Um, and anyway, one time, so we built uh, this little luge run up by my parents' house, which is basically a super long sledding hill that goes through the trees and it swerves back and forth, and it's pretty fast and it's a little bit dangerous. But like there's injuries every year, but it's fun. We just like it. So anyway, we were going down and we were like, what'd be super funny would be, like to if there was some way to kind of do this better. And one day on our wanders, we were hiking up American Fork Canyon, and there was a super steep hill, and we had gotten a ton of snow. So we just rolled some snowballs down to watch them, but just pick up because we're boys,
Mhm.
and so we just do stuff like that. But um, anyway, we were like, it would be cool. We were like, I don't think you could sled down this because you'd sink in too far. But I was like, what if we kayaked down it? I bet a kayak would work. And so the next week we grabbed a couple of kayaks and we took them up and we were like, all right. Um, and my wife did not think it was a good idea. She was like, do not break the kayak or you are in such huge trouble. And I was like, okay. So I'm like, okay, goal is not to break the kayaks. So we hit this, the same spot with this super deep powder. It was amazing. Like they just kind of float on the top, and you can actually kind of steer them a little bit by turning,
Mhm.
um, and you would slow down. Like it's not quite like skis, but you can slow down. So you have some control. And we were like, that is so cool. We were just having a ball. So then we were like, oh, it'd be even cooler if we came off a mountain in the snow and into a lake that was water, and it'd be like both. So anyway, we went to Tibble Fork, which is up American Fork Canyon. Anyways, there's this reservoir. Um, but the problem was it was so cold that there was only one tiny little spot where there was water. And to get to that spot, there was about a 10-foot drop off. And we had discovered that kayaks do not do well when they drop off things. So we had gone off a couple of little things and they just nose down, just
Mhm.
straight. I mean, probably there's a way to do it. We just weren't good enough kayakers, but
Yeah.
it's not like we're experts. I'm sure there's people who do it, but um, anyway, so we we had found that we didn't have the control, and ours are just kind of like basic, like buy them at Costco kind of kayaks. They're not like, the high end. We don't have the skirts and everything. We're just, it's just kayak. So it's got a little seat. Um, so we end up going down, so we see that and we're like, that's a bad idea. So we decide not to do it. And we were like, we are really, really smart for not doing that. But we end up deciding that we're like, you know what we should do instead? Let's just go down the sledding hill that's right by there. So there's this huge sledding hill where everybody goes and they sled and they take their tubes down it. Um, and um, they uh, we are on a part of it where we're not close to the place where they walk up, so we just cut up through the trees. We get to the top and we're like, oh, okay, this will be great. Um, so we start going down and we realize that we have never we get out of the trees where we were and where it's kind of powdery and we hit the part where it's packed down. We hadn't gone on anything that was really packed. And the kayaks got going really fast, like 30 miles an hour. Like we're flying down this thing, and I'm like, whoa, 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 this is way too fast. Like everything before then, it'd been nice. So and we didn't because we didn't walk up it, we didn't realize there is a big dip at the bottom that all the kids on tubes really like because it launches them up, they get a little. Well, in a kayak, when you're going that fast, the problem is the kayak is long. So that dip you just slammed into it. I hit it and I I felt like someone hit my back with a sledgehammer. Like it just smacked hard. And then the kayak went airborne. Um, and um, as it went airborne, the front
Oh,
tipped.
geez.
And so the first part to land was the tip of the kayak. It hit and just cartwheeled. Now, my daughter's boyfriend, he's like 6'4", 140 pounds, maybe 150. I mean, he's just twiggy. It launched him. Like he hit the dip, the kayak kind of stopped and it just launched him up and out. But I am not 160 pounds. And so I stayed in the kayak. Thing just cartwheeled with me in it. And
Oh my
oh,
gosh.
it was brutal. Like he came over, and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm not." Like I couldn't breathe and everything hurt, like my back and my chest, just everything hurt. And he was like, "Yeah, you're kind of bleeding." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, on your head." Because of course we're not wearing helmets. But should have learned that lesson. Anyway, I have this huge cut on my forehead that I didn't even feel because the rest of me is hurting so bad. I
Mhm.
didn't notice that it cut my head. Anyway, um, so we have to hike back around the lake, and I'm just in just massive pain. Anyway, a couple of ribs were broken, and
Oh, geez.
transverse processes, like I actually broke vertebra.
And you're back.
Um, and so, not the best idea. But we can laugh about it because I'm like, yeah, we probably should have, like, that was dumb. We should have at least walked the path that we were going to come down, but we didn't think about it. And so we learned. But, and we got home and my wife was like, well, I was like, well, we didn't break the kayak.
Kayak's okay.
Yeah, kayak's fine. I'm not. So anyway, but it's, you can laugh about it. I mean, and it was dumb and it really did hurt. I mean, it took months to recover. On a funny note, after we had fully healed, he had a concussion and, a couple of other things. And so after we'd fully healed, we went back and we actually created a trail and we made it so that everything was flat. And we actually did come off the mountain and straight into the
Into the
water
water.
and then paddled across. So we didn't give up. Like we were like, okay, we're not letting the mountain beat us. We'll still, but we're gonna do it smarter. And so again, even though, yeah, it was painful, but yeah, we just learned from it and took the lessons. And the lesson wasn't you shouldn't snow kayak because it was fun. I would do it
Yeah.
again. I just wouldn't do that. I'd do it smarter. And so, yeah. So
So, how do you do this while teaching the LSAT? How do you choose to have fun while teaching formal logic and critical thinking and logical reasoning?
yeah, so um a lot of that is like there's funny wrong answers. Like sometimes and looking at the question, so some of it is learning to laugh at the answers and the passages themselves. Um and the other thing is just I really do think a lot of fun is just what we choose to call fun. Like I said, golf. People choose to think golf is fun.
Hmm.
But you could look at it and say, that's miserable. I mean, that sounds like being forced to march with heavy packs, like that doesn't sound fun. But people choose to do it. So I think some of it is helping people see that they can choose it. Like they can choose to say, this is my hobby. Like this is what I choose to do for fun. And and within that, again, it's got a built-in joy mechanism because almost everybody starts out not good at the LSAT. That um, I don't know of anyone who got a 180 on their first practice test, which is the maximum score. Like the average starting score, even for our class, which is above average, is still right around a little over 50% right. And so you have this massive pool, and I do talk about it that teaching them that I do believe joy is growth, and that as they get better, they can see this as joy. And yes, they have to take the LSAT, but they can choose to see it as a burden, or they can choose to see it as, kind of fun and play. Um, I mean, video games, like, why are they fun? They're fun because they're hard, right? I mean, you die a lot of times when you're trying to beat a new level or
Mhm.
whatever. Like, I mean, that's just how video games work, and they're fun specifically because they're hard. And so I often like one of the things that I do is I tell them early on, if I say it's a fun game, I mean it's a hard game because fun is hard. Like
Yeah, that's great.
that's just the way that it is. I mean, that like we do like hard things, and I kind of do that all the time. Some of it is language. I talk about we're going to be playing with these types of questions. Not we're going to be grinding through a lot of
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
the words that we use matter, and how we refer to things, I think makes a difference. So some of it is just building in that idea that we're playing, um, but then helping them see that like fun is hard. There's like there's a reason nobody makes it a destination to climb to the highest peak in Kansas.
Yeah.
Like it's
It's not
because
fun.
it's yeah, it's there's a
Unless we choose to make it fun, but
let's choose to make it fun.
generally speaking,
But generally, what will people see as fun? Climbing, the highest peak in Colorado or in Utah,
yeah.
or you're really aggressive in Alaska. And people do Everest. There's nothing comfortable or easy about that. I mean, it's crazy hard. People die.
Yeah.
But people see it as fun. And we see hard things as fun. And so that's one of the things that I try to communicate early on is, look, hard is fun. Like that's just the way we're geared. We're wired for that. Partially, I think, because when we do something hard, we see that growth. We recognize this is growth to be able to do this. And so, one of the things I'll point out to people is we'll have them redo and go back and try games that they did earlier. Try problems that earlier were this massive difficulty for them, and then have them do it again 2 months later, and suddenly it's this really easy thing for them. And then they're able to see that. Kind of like you with, talking about Duolingo,
Yeah.
like, yo mangio una mera. Like early on, you were like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. You had to think about each part, and it was even hard for your mouth to make the
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
because they're just a little bit different. But now, when you get that as one of your review things, like you could do it almost without thinking. I mean, it's like instant.
Mhm.
Uh, and so helping us see that, like fun is hard. So that's one of the things. And then just sharing funny stories and things along the way. Again, trying to infuse laughter into teaching, I think is always a good thing.
Well, this is something that I really appreciate from you, having read the book and having this conversation. And I even told my students about it last time. I kind of described, who you were and the role you played, and talked about how we're gonna try to have fun in class. I even said something, like if we don't laugh during the class period, then it's a failure. And one of the students, I called on one of the students to come up, and they were either going to tell the truth about a picture they were seeing, or they were going to lie. And so he starts describing the picture, how it's black and white, and on and on and on. And then there's this, and then he describes this red car in the picture, and everybody just starts laughing because now he's blown his cover and everybody knows he's
Right.
lying. Um, but it made me think that we've come up in this in a culture of academia where people are so serious and they take themselves so serious. And if you're laughing, you're not being serious. And this is serious stuff. And I just think when I talk about the LSAT to my students, because many of them are also pre-law, I say, it's a beautiful test and it's so much fun. And I have to think that you are a big part of that by making me view that test as fun. I still have a positive connotation, positive relationship with that test. And I do remember so many of the stories. So I really appreciate this approach of one, hard is fun, and two, it's a choice to have fun.
Yeah. And there's funny questions. I mean, like I don't know if you remember there's that passage about like they mention like testing for mind reading ability in pigeons. And you're
Yeah,
like, what?
yeah.
Like, we do that passage all the time, and I'm like, stop and think about that for a minute. Like,
Yeah.
and people laugh when they come across it. So if you're just and some of it is you do have to look for it, which I think is similar to growth. Like you have to look for the growth, you have to look for the fun.
You have to
Um,
recognize the growth. Yeah, yeah. I like
yeah,
that.
it's there, you just have to work at it.
So if you're riding your bike and it's raining and you're
Yeah,
freezing and you're in shorts, how do you have fun in that moment, which leads to a story?
yeah. I mean, it's funny because, um, there's a lot of funny things. It's actually really funny because especially when I'm riding home at night, it sounds weird, and I don't think I shared this in the book, so maybe it's a different story, but um, I have come to love it when it rains and I'm biking home at night, which may sound super weird because you're like, why
Mhm.
is that fun? But when with my light, so I've got a light on the front because I'm biking home at like 10:30 at night. Um, and as the water flips up off the tire, it actually looks like a firework. Like as the water comes through, like it shoots through and it looks like fireworks coming off. Um, and it's just this like magical thing. I will literally be like so mesmerized by this that I'm suddenly home. It's about an hour bike ride, and then
Wow.
I'm home because I'm just like, and it just shoots different ways, and it's just really pretty. Like I have to be careful like to watch for deer and stuff because I'm like mesmerized by the headlight. So like just fun. I mean, it's this little tiny thing. I mean, it's not okay. It's not the most beautiful thing. It's not like a water. It's not like
Mhm.
the Bellagio water fountains or something, or like World of Color at Disneyland. You know, but it's beautiful to me. Um, and it's actually funny. I remember the first time that I biked home and it was snowing really hard, and I was like, "Whoa!" There was something like absolutely like magical about it. And is the story you're talking about the one with forgetting my gloves?
Yes.
Yeah, so anyway, the first time that I kind of got caught in a good snowstorm, and it was kind of a weird one. It was in the spring, and so it just kind of came out of nowhere, and we get those every once in a while. Well, I didn't have any gloves, and I found that on the bike, if you can keep your toes and your fingers warm, you're okay. Like everything else is going to be fine, but your fingers really take the brunt of it, because they're kind of out in front and they catch the wind, and you got to have your fingers flexible because you got to be able to brake. And so anyway, I was like, oh, no big deal. I'll just go to the Walmart and grab some gloves. Well, I went to the Walmart and there weren't any gloves. And so I was like, oh, because they'd sold them all out and they'd cleared them all out. And I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna need gloves. And then I was like, I wonder if I used oven mitts. Like, because I mean, they keep the heat from burning you.
Makes sense.
So I bet they keep the cold from freezing you too. I was like, I mean, it seems reasonable. I mean, they're designed to be like a temperature barrier. So anyway, I went and I just bought two oven mitts and then rode home with those oven mitts. And I don't think I talked about this, but I actually took a video on my phone of when you're biking through snow, that same light, the way that it hits the snowflakes, it actually looks like when you make the jump to hyperspace in Star Wars. Like the snowflakes are like shooting past you. And it's so cool. Like it was so cool that I was like, okay, I actually have to take a video of this. Um, and anyway, when I got home, first off, my wife was like, "What is on your hands?" Like, I was like, "Well, they're oven mitts." And so anyway, I still have those oven mitts because I look at them and I'm like, those are another example. Like I could have been miserable and been like, "Oh, this sucks and it's cold and whatever," or I can get some mittens to bike home. And I could have chosen, well, okay, my wife, if I'd have called her and said, "Hey, will you come pick me up?" And she would have, like
Yeah,
she would have been fine. But I also would have missed out on seeing snow that way and like seeing it. So now, if it's a little bit snowy, as long as it's not sticking so it's icy and I'm gonna crash, um, then yeah, it's just magical. Like it really, like the way the snowflakes, it really does look like you're shooting through
from
outer
Star
space.
Wars. Yeah,
And it's so cool. So I'll have to send you the video of what it looks like because you can actually see it on my
yeah.
phone. So yes, it's not super safe to. Okay, I get like texting and driving is one thing, but like taking video on your phone while biking is
In the snow.
probably another level of stupid.
And
Um,
just imagine the joy, of course, that people get from seeing you, right? Somebody
right.
driving in the snow and they look over
Yeah.
and see you.
They're like, what? Like, what is on this guy's hand? Get these oven mitts. I mean, and it's kind of like it's like the bike helmet. You just kind of embrace it and just, because, but they worked great. So if anybody ever is in a pinch and you need gloves, oven mitts, they're cheap. They're actually cheaper than a lot of gloves,
And
and
gloves.
they work great. Like they actually were pretty good at keeping my hands warm.
Well, I
So
love this relationship between fun and joy as well, because as we were saying earlier, when there's room for growth, there's room for joy. And there's also a similar relationship with fun and imperfection that you've noticed.
yeah, yeah, because yeah, again, I mean, some of those fun experiences. I mean, if I were perfect at always planning for the weather, I wouldn't have had to buy those
Yeah.
gloves. And so like it's a lot of times it is the unpredictable. And I think most people have experiences in their lives where, I'm sure you've had things where things did not go the way that you planned, and it was an absolute blast,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and if you can just kind of roll with those things, then and just not be convinced there's only one way, then yeah, you can have a lot of joy.
And just, I love this idea of just looking for the imperfections, looking for these,
Yeah.
recognizing them and have joy. And even, something you do with your kids. Um, how do you teach your children the LSAT?
Oh, so it's actually fun because I've got a daughter who she's heard back from 4 schools and she's waiting to hear back from another 4 um,
Okay.
on where she got in. But this is going to sound really twisted, but what we did with my kids early on. So I teach standardized tests for a living. So one of the things that I've discovered is, look, standardized tests, love them or hate them, they're just one of the things that determines a lot of things in life. So
Mhm.
you know and so what I started doing with my kids was, so we homeschooled them because I was home during the day and then gone in the evenings. And so having grown up being with them, well, when they were little, I was a full-time stay-at-home dad, and then once I started teaching LSAT in the evenings, I just really wasn't willing to give up that time with them. And so we had them homeschool until they got to the high school age, and then let them choose what they wanted to do. And they've done different things, like all of them have been different. But um, my youngest daughter, um, she was like, well, I just want to finish my associate's degree, by doing online classes. But she had gotten to the point where she was finished with enough of them. So this year, she's, the age of a senior, and she was like, I think I want to go to school for my senior year. So she's at American Fork High School just for a senior year. Like she never went for any other years. She's just a senior. And she's like, it's great. I never had to be like the youngest kid at the school, and
Yeah.
having the time of her life. It's just having a ball. And a lot of, she's not worried about like a bunch of this stuff, but she's just having a good time. But so what we would do when they were little was, if they did a good job on and completed all of their assignments for their math stuff during the week, then Friday, they got to do standardized test stuff instead. So that was their like reward, which I know is twisted. I mean, it's like, treating broccoli as a reward or whatever. But which one of my sons feels that way about broccoli. Just we had
Mhm.
this Winnie the Pooh like learn to read game, and it was like Tigger loves green broccoli, and Tigger loved broccoli in that thing, and so my son loves broccoli. Um but so anyway, with that, that's what we would so and my thought process was, well, I see it that way, like it's just, and we would just play with it, and we would work on it together, and we wouldn't, I would say, oh, okay, these are the ones we missed. Let's figure out how to do that, and we just made it so it was play. And, at least for some of the kids, they really did just learn to see standardized tests as, oh, that's a reward. Like that's a game. Like that's a fun thing, not a stressful thing. And the kids that really kind of embrace that, it really has been interesting the way that they've just seen tests as, oh, this is awesome. Um, and um, and again, the goal wasn't to, like to do it perfectly the first time.
Mhm.
It was, let's work through it. Let's play with this. And in my mind, that's actually like every question that you miss is one less question that you have to miss on the real test. So it's great to miss questions when you're practicing. Like that's the best possible scenario, because then you know what things you need to learn so that they can't trick you with it in the future.
Well,
So
I love the mindset of let's play with this. I think that's just such a great approach, and it certainly wore off on me to again the point that I say I love the LSAT. And not that I was great at it. I mean, I started out,
pretty
at
good.
the average, and I got pretty good, but I was never top of the top. But still, it was just you made it so fun, and it rubbed off on me. Why don't we transition to the last lesson now?
Yeah.
So we've done um, joy and love and fun and growth. So the last thing you told your daughter that day when
Yeah.
she was going to dance class.
Yeah. It's just do your best. Um, and I think that too, that concept of do your best, I think there's kind of two elements of it. Um, there are, you know, doing my best. It has to do with a kind of being my best self, but doing your best is another thing that I think has become a little harder in as with the prevalence of a lot of social media types of things. There is an element of at the heart of do your best um, is it's your best. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. Your best is what you should strive for. Um, and that really we don't need to be worried about what other people are doing or the way that they're kind of handling. We're going to be a lot worse at things. With hockey, I was terrible at it compared with other people, but I got better and I was doing my best that day. And my best at the beginning was, well, I stayed up and used the stick as balance. And my best a month in was, well, I can move, but I can't stop very well. And my best a year later was different. Um, but it was only by being all in and saying, you know what, I'm not going to hold back here. I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to be okay with the fact that my best is not perfect. Like, I don't ever want, I don't ever want, my kids to feel like, they have to be perfect. And I don't want my students to. I tell people you can miss questions and still get a 180. Like
Yeah.
it's about doing your best. And maybe your best is different than other people's. That's not what matters. It's what your best is. So the first concept is yours. It is internal to you. Um, and the second thing, kind of idea with that is, but it is also doing your best, like really giving your full effort. Because there have been lots of things where I sabotage myself because I was too afraid to try to really go all in. and this is one of the things that I've added some stuff to the book lately about, um, I have to I have to really be willing to give my best. Like to really and honestly say, I'm all in on this and I'm okay. My best has to include the possibility of looking stupid. It has to include the possibility of failing
Yeah.
at it and not achieving what I set out to achieve. Um, because sometimes I don't set as my achievement my best. Instead, I set some alternative. And that's one of the things that I think I really want them to know what what I want them to do is their best. And that, you know, they might do something where their best puts them mediocre compared with other people. And that's just fine because if it's their best, they should still be proud of it.
Yeah.
And um, you know, my best painting is might be recognizable as what I was trying to paint, but I'll still be proud of it if it's my best. And um, and it's only by trying our best. We have to try our best in order to improve our best. If we're only giving half effort, we never really push ourselves. We don't get out of that comfort zone. And so, doing your best um, is about being willing to push to the edge of what we're capable of, because we know that's where the growth takes place. Is when
Yeah.
we're doing our best naturally becomes better. And so I think that doing your best is also kind of at the core of that growth. Um, if you really want to get better, you have to push yourself to, to do your best. Um, and so it's a little bit of a tricky thing because I, you know, it I don't want them to feel judged, and it's not about sort of judging yourself negatively when you don't perform well. But I also want them to really and truly give their best. And um, I want them to, seek to both do their best, but also be their best. Like choose that's how we act. And um, I've thought about this a lot with some other areas. I think there are also times where we might be able to succeed in a sense with something less than our best, but that's not okay either. You know, like first off, best doesn't mean you're going to beat other people, but also just because you beat other people doesn't mean
Doesn't
that
mean you're
it's your
best.
best.
Yeah.
You know, like if, um, like if my best, you know, is maybe, you know, 20th percentile, that's fine. But it's not fine if my 50% effort puts me at the top. I still haven't done my best, and I'm not going to feel satisfied by that. And in all reality, you won't like things where you don't have to work to be the best. Like I think it's doing our best. That's where we feel good. Like when you have really given your full effort to something, the outcome is less important to you than, I mean, yeah, you want to have a good outcome, but you can really feel satisfied knowing, yeah, I did my best. And I gave what I could. And I think that we also have to, at the same time that we want to push ourselves, we also have to recognize when we have done our best and give ourselves the grace to say, that was my best, and I'm proud of that. Um, and not worry about where it falls relative to other people or even relative to our initial expectations. That there's times where, yeah, my best fell short of what I was hoping to accomplish, but that's okay. Like just doing our best. Um, it is both the highest standard, but also, like because best, I put a high bar on that.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of things that I have not given my best effort to. Um, you know, and it's less. Sometimes I still got a good outcome, even though I didn't work hard. Um, but I don't feel satisfied or fulfilled by those. And there's other things where I worked really hard and I gave my best effort, and it didn't turn out the way that I wanted, but I still have this sense of peace and joy about it because like I did my best and that's okay.
So
So,
I interviewed somebody recently, and they're kind of one of the things they most want to pass on is that they believe that fierce self-discipline requires fierce self-acceptance and self-love, because
oh, I
you
love
have
that.
to be able to balance this. If you're so disciplined, if you're trying to be so disciplined, but then you mess up and you hate yourself, you're going to be less disciplined. It's not sustainable. And I imagine
Yeah.
you see this with students, right? Who are probably some of the students who perform the best are maybe hardest on themselves.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I love that idea, and I think that I think that really is probably one of those things. And I think maybe it goes back to kind of that sense of if we don't love, we don't have that room, we can't feel free to give our best. You know, and and I also, I would say, and this, kind of is in that, that chapter on loving yourself first. Um, the way that we show our love to ourselves is through discipline. It is by pushing ourselves to be better. And that the two, I think, I think that's brilliant that, that idea because they are really closely related. Like if we don't, if we don't have that self-acceptance and self-love, then yeah, we can't have, we're not going to have the discipline to do those things because we don't care enough about ourselves and we don't feel safe,
Yeah.
to do it. But I think that's really a brilliant insight. So I love that idea. But yeah, that's yeah, and I think that it also, um, when we really love someone, we don't we don't just ignore the existence of the bad things about them. We know that they're there and we're okay with them, and if we want to improve, we can't just say, like self-love isn't, oh, I'm awesome at everything. Like it's, that's not really love. And I think it's probably the same thing with, you and your kids. Like you love them, and that doesn't mean you ignore the existence of weakness or things that they need to do better at. And so I think it's that I think it requires that also that brutal self-honesty, like um, that you've got to be willing to say, I'm really good at this, and that's a good thing, and I'm not as good at this, and that's something I want to work on, or but I love that idea of that the discipline being linked to the love and acceptance. So
Well, I
that's
know you've experienced this in a number of ways, and one quick story that stuck out to me was when you were memorizing the Gettysburg Address,
oh yeah, yeah.
and
So
your teacher was holding you to a high standard.
yeah, so yeah, that so when I was in high school, I had a teacher, and he actually was a college professor. I don't, did you ever know Ralph Hancock?
Mm.
Anyway, he was a college professor. He was teaching our U.S. History class, and this was also, this goes back to kind of the best. Um, so he said he would give us extra credit if we memorized the Gettysburg Address. So I I spent time and I memorized it, and um, I, I got it down, and it's not that it's difficult to memorize, but it's not, like a 2 hour speech. Lincoln nailed it. So I mean, there's some irony in there, in the world will little note nor long remember what we say here. I'm like, well, that's actually kind of funny because actually we memorize it now. Um, so, but so anyway, I memorized the thing, I performed it. Everybody was like, "Wow, that was great!" Like the classmates were like, "Got it," and he was like, "Not quite right." Um, and I had missed one word. Like it was just one word, and it wasn't material to the text. Like it didn't change the meaning at all. Um, that I think I had thrown in an and, where there wasn't. or I'd forgotten a name. It was one or the other, and I wrote it down, I think, in the book, but because I had talked to him, but I can't remember what it was. But it was one word, and it was something that I felt like was trivial. And at first, I was a little mad. I was like, "Come on!" And he made the point. He said, "Look, I know you're capable of memorizing this perfectly. Like you can do it, and I'll let you try again." But he wasn't going to let me settle for less than what I was capable of. Um, and that was like, it's interesting the impact that that had on me because it, even though at first glance, some people might be like, well, that's dumb. He was judging you. That statement was maybe the greatest compliment of all
Yeah.
because he was saying, you are capable of getting every word right. And I'm not going to let you stop because you will stop, like he knew. Like, I mean, I memorized it for the extra credit. If he'd given me the extra credit, I wouldn't have kept doing it. Um, and but that statement, it really was empowering. And um I really love him for that, for not letting me settle for something below my best. Um, and that's, I think sometimes we feel like, and I fall into this trap with my kids a lot, saying, well, maybe we'll call that good enough. But we have to be careful because on some level, we're sending a message that's good enough, meaning, am I saying I believe that's your best?
Yeah.
And it might not be.
Yeah.
And
I don't believe in you. I don't believe you could do better.
right,
We're
yeah,
limiting. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's one of the one of the most heartbreaking things that I experienced early on was so we had a student whose dad made enormous amounts of money. I mean, like super huge amounts of money. Um, and that he was doing some tutoring, and the kid was doing a little bit better, but wasn't scoring great yet. And the dad actually reached out to me um, to kind of find out how much it would cost to have me take the test for him. And like to get, just like because this was when it was a lot easier to cheat and you could do a fake ID and stuff.
This was pre-Varsity Blues scandal.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and I remember thinking, like just feeling like so like sorry for that kid because essentially what the dad was saying is, I don't think he can do it.
Yeah. Not
And I'm
capable.
like, he the kid knows that. Like that's the ultimate undermining of your sense of self-worth. Like I I think you have to cheat to get into a great law school. I mean, like, what that's a horrible message to send. And then so I think, you know, um, it's I mean, it also was, one of those moral dilemmas because it was the amount that he was offering was more than I made a year. But um, but I was like, no, I mean but it really was that sense of we we don't sometimes the greatest expression of love is to not let people settle for less than their best.
Yeah.
Um, Now we do have to be careful because, you know, but I think that's another area that maybe is getting a little bit hard in society today. That we can oftentimes people are like, you're just judging them harshly, that and it's difficult. I get that this is a fine line. Um,
Or
but
people err too much on the side of self-love, right? Like I love myself who I am, so I don't need to push myself because I'm perfect how I am,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Like I accept myself, so I don't need to get better.
Right.
And the fact is, like I said, that I really am so grateful for that professor for not accepting me for what I had put in, because it made me say, yes, I can do better. And I did. I went back and I figured it out and I got it right in the end and got the extra credit. But the extra credit was nothing compared with what I learned. And it really was like, it was his way of saying, you're capable of more.
Yeah.
And I think that also, that I think this is another thing where I hope that people who read the book see that as well, and recognize when someone asks you to do better, they're not that's not a negative expression. It doesn't mean that they don't love you or that they don't think that you are good enough as you are, um, for where you're at right now. It means that they see more in you. I mean, that's um, I just went through this with my daughter. So she got to the point where she was ready to stop studying for the LSAT. She was getting a score. She's like, look, this will be, and in her case, it was, good enough to get her in and probably get a scholarship to some schools in the top 25. Um, but I know her, like I've seen what she is. And I said, you're not going to be happy with that score. In 10 years, you are going to feel sad that you did this.
Mm.
And Um, and so she ended up, taking a gap year and studying for another year. Um, and it worked out well for some other things that were going on in her life. Um, but in the end, when she got her score back, she and when, even before she got her score back, even when she went in to take the test, she said, I am so glad that I waited. I'm so glad that I put in that
Oh,
extra
that's
time.
great.
And obviously, she did well, and um, so but I was at that point proud of her, not because of what her score was,
All right.
but because I knew she hadn't put in her full effort. Like I knew she hadn't put in all of the hours to get to the point where she was at her best. And so even though she was a little bit mad at me at first, when I was like, no, I don't want you to take the test right now. I want you to keep studying. Um, that it's sometimes that's what love looks like, is asking people to do their best. And in the end, I was really proud, and I really said, I don't care what the score comes out. I'm proud of where you did,
Yeah.
what you did, because you really did put in your best. And she felt that. And so going in, she felt this sense of calm, that I've done
Yeah.
everything I
She's
can.
done her best.
Yeah. And that, you know, come what may, that's her best effort.
Well, Brent, we've covered a lot of ground, and I am so grateful to you for all of the time you've given me, so much more than I ever expected or would have ever dared ask for. But I have one final question. So you've written the book, you're revising the book. When you sent it to me, I said, I really hope you publish this. I would love to hear an audio version of you reading the book. Are people going to have a chance to read this book? How
Yes.
and when? I guess that's multiple questions
That,
in one, but
so I have said that I am going to have it done I'm trying to finish it by my birthday, which is July,
okay.
of this year. At least in a draft form that I'm willing to that I will consider my best, for the
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
not to say that I won't revise it and add and update things, but I'm right now in the process of editing. If there are people who listen and would love to be beta readers, I would love beta readers, people who could give feedback and advice. With my writers group, I've gotten some great tips already, and so I'll have that out, and I'll let you know what happens. Like I said, there's one publisher who's at least expressed interest in reading a copy of it, and I'll keep working on it. And if nothing works out, it's one where I would just read it and or, maybe do a podcast like this and talk about it. I've actually thought about doing it to give some sort of interesting video component to it, to do it while have video of just making a pot and then like read chapters while I
Yeah.
make it. Like
Oh, that'd be cool.
yeah, I was like, I'll call it Thoughts on Pots. Um, I'll be like um, you know, do like be the Bob Ross of pottery.
Yeah, yeah.
Just talking about, my happy little thing. So at some point I do want to have that ready, and I will, but I'll keep, I have said this is what I have to be working on right now, because I do feel like I need to be working on it and get it out. So um it will be in some form by July.
Okay.
But if there are readers who want to read it earlier and are willing to give me some feedback on it, I would love that. I'm in that phase where I just want to make sure it's better, and if people have ideas that are helpful, um, I'm super open to that. I know that I as I've gotten feedback on it, that always has been helpful. It
Yeah.
helps me elaborate on it. So
Okay. Well, yeah, listeners, just contact me. I'll put you in touch with Brent if
yeah,
you'd like to do a read through, offer comments. This has been so fun for me. You probably don't remember this. Maybe you do. You probably, there would be no reason you remember this, but I first took your class in 2006 while I was still in school, while I was playing football,
yeah,
but I just didn't have the time to dedicate to it. I went and took
right.
the LSAT anyway, did very poorly, and was like, well, I guess I'm not going to law school. And
Well,
it wasn't,
it was the night after the Utah State game, right?
yes, I think
Or
so.
the
Yeah.
morning after the Utah State, because it was a Friday night game
Yeah.
at Utah
Yep.
State, and it was that first Saturday in October, because you took the October one, if I remember right.
Yep, you're right. So yeah, you have a great memory for that. And it was 3 years later when I decided, okay, I'm gonna really do this. And
Yeah,
that's when I really buckled down, spent 4 months going to your class. Well, 6 months, and then at the final 2 months, I was doing 8 hours a day in the library and was having really so much fun.
yeah,
But had I not done that, I would have never gone to law school. I got into Stanford, and when I told them, I would, in my letter, I said, if you let me in, I don't care what financial aid package you give me, I'm coming no matter what, just to try to, like, of
yeah,
course, the schools were concerned about their yield. And so it was like, look, just let me in, I'll take care of it. And when I went on my recruiting trip, they gave me my financial aid package, which I didn't know, but at Stanford was need based. I didn't know at the
yeah,
time. And because I was married and had a child and was off my parents' tax returns because I was older, I had as much need as anybody possibly could have, according to them.
right,
Um, so because I got such an amazing financial aid package from them and graduated at 32, I was able to get a PhD after that because I didn't have that much debt. I was able to
right.
start a postdoc at 37. I would not be a professor without you. I would not have found my, is it the word daimon? Is
Yeah,
that how you pronounce
yeah,
it?
that's what this book that we read called it.
According to them.
Yeah,
I've found mine. I love to teach. I love to research and write and share what I learn. So I was honored to be your student back then. I've been just honored to be your student again on these couple sessions. It's been a true highlight for me on this podcast, being able to reconnect with you again and learn, not only refresh my memory of logical reasoning, but learn from your book as well. And as I mentioned last time, I think I for Christmas for my wife, I printed off a copy of your book. I gifted it to her for Christmas with a gift card to a restaurant so that we can read it. We both now read it. I've read it twice. She's read it once, and we're going to go have a book club at Jay Wilson's here in a few weeks to discuss your book. So, with all
oh,
that
yeah.
said, just thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure for me, Brent.
And it's been an honor to be on it. I'm so grateful that you did this, and it really has been, it came at the right time, because I kind of let the book lapse a little bit. I hadn't come back to it, and it really has made me realize I need to be working on this. That I need to be actively pursuing this, because I just kind of life gets busy, and I was focusing on other things, and it's been really good for me to kind of focus on getting it to a finished thing, and I know that that's part of me, doing my best is actually getting it to a finished product. I feel like right as it stands, it was in the form of, it's fine, but when I look forward to when I do get it to the final form. I'm excited for you to get to read it in final form and see what my best actually looks like.
Well, it's
'Cause
been so great to read so far.
yeah. So thank you again for having me on and for letting me come back and talk about the book because it really is that's a source of joy for me and it really has been awesome. And it's I mean, as you notice, like I mean, I remember, like I remember when you had the game. I was like, oh, that is a rough time to take the test because I remember talking to you on your way into the test. That was when it was in the Wilkinson Center.
Yeah,
And
yep,
I
you're right.
remember talking to you on the way in, just in that hallway right over there, and you talked about, the game the night before and stuff. So, um, but some of that is, yeah, like I get so much joy from seeing your journey and knowing that, I got to help a little bit with some of the early trajectory on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a lot of joy. So thanks so much for letting me come. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll hit stop right there. It's just been so fun.
Yeah.